Chapter 368. Ning Ke was extremely disdainful of this statement. As a student of the second floor of the academy and someone like Chen Pippi, he was more and more convinced that he was a genius. Because he was very tall, the old man always felt a little cramped sitting in the chair. He changed several positions before finally finding a slightly more comfortable one. He leaned against the back of the chair and supported his chin with his hand. He looked at Ning Ke and asked, "You want to kill people when you're unhappy? Have you killed people before?" Ning Ke put the empty wine urn at his feet and said, "I won't tell you how many people I've killed. That's against the law of the Tang Empire. But you can think about it this way." The old man shook the empty wine urn in his hand and grumbled angrily. He asked the shopkeeper to bring 2 more urns and then looked at him and asked, "But why do you want to kill people?" Ning Ke thought for a moment and shook his head. He said, "Although I'm almost drunk and you're drunk, I still can't tell you this." The shopkeeper trotted all the way to the terrace and respectfully put the 2 urns beside the old man. Then he bowed and retreated, not daring to say a word, let alone urge him to pay the bill. He didn't know who this old man was. Even the real owner of the building of Pines and Cranes, a high-ranking official in the imperial court, didn't know the real identity of this old man. It was just that the building of Pines and Cranes had been hiding a portrait and a simple rule for countless years. The rule was that if an old man who looked like the old man in the portrait came to the building of Pines and Cranes, everyone in the building must treat the old man like an ancestor and ignore him as if he had killed his father. This was to avoid upsetting the old man. It didn't matter even if he was not the old man in the portrait, because recognizing the wrong ancestor would at most make the building of Pines and Cranes lose some money and face. But if the ancestor came back and they didn't treat him well, then what reason did the building of Pines and Cranes have to continue to exist in Chang'an? The old man patted open the spring mud urn and happily took a sip. He said, "In fact, when I was as young as you, I often wanted to kill people." Ning Ke looked at his face and couldn't determine the specific age of the old man, but he thought he should be very old. Then when was he young? How many years ago was it? "Who did you want to kill back then?" he asked curiously. The old man put the wine jar on the small table beside the chair and looked at the bare winter branches in front of the balcony. He said, "My mother was my father's 3rd concubine. My father died when I was 3 years old. After that, the clan did not tolerate us. My mother took me away from the old house and wandered around. She lived a hard life and was bullied by the world. So, when I had the ability to kill, the first thing I wanted to do was to return to the old house and kill all the old women and relatives who had bullied me and my son. Then, would dig up my father's grave, crush his bones, and scatter his ashes." He was talking about the most sinister things in the world, such as murder, arson, and extermination. The old man's expression was very calm and gentle. At this moment, he did not look like an old man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life, but like a child lying on top of a haystack in a valley. His childish face floated with white clouds as he recounted the events of the past. Ning Ke looked at the old man in silence and suddenly frowned. He asked, "Did you kill him?" The old man's slender index finger tapped on the spring mud wine jar on the table, making a clear and loud sound, like the sound of a memorial tablet falling on the ground in a secluded ancestral hall of a century-old house. He looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "I won't tell you." Ning Ke was speechless. He thought to himself, "You are so old, why are you still so petty and vengeful? The person I want to kill. He has killed many innocent people. Of course, I am not a saint. I just want to get real peace of mind for revenge. That person destroyed the best part of my life and killed my parents who loved me the most. I want to take revenge for my personal grudge, which is similar to what you thought back then. But those people in your clan were relatively easier to kill." He continued after a moment of silence, "But the person I want to kill is very powerful, has a high position, and has a background that even I find tricky." The old man looked at him and frowned. He said, "You don't look like a person with no status." Ning Ke smiled and said proudly, "Old man, you are really experienced and have seen countless people. You are born with a pair of big eyes. To tell you the truth, I am a person with a very high status. Because my teacher is very great, so of course I am also very great. The old man said unhappily, nonsense. Your teacher, of course. Even if he is great, what does it have to do with you being great? Ning Ke ignored him and continued, now, even compared with the tycoon I want to kill, our status can be said to be similar. The old man sneered. Then why are you still worried? If you want to kill him, just find a chance to do so. Ning Ke was silent for a long time, with a helpless expression on his face. He sighed and said, the problem is that my status comes from my teacher, and my teacher seems to be very willing to be unreasonable like us students. But in fact, he is very stubborn and very reasonable. He always says that the law of the Tang Empire is the first. Don't you think this statement is very unreasonable? If the law of the Tang Empire is the first, how can it be unreasonable? Hearing this, the old man's face suddenly became ugly. He scolded unhappily, of course it is reasonable. What does being unreasonable have to do with the law of the Tang Empire? Can't I kill people without using crooked ways? Ning Ke did not notice the old man's expression. He staggered over and took the initiative to pick up a new pot of wine. He patted the seal and poured the wine into his mouth. He said, if the law of the Tang Empire is the first, then I have to find evidence for a lawsuit. The problem is, where can I find evidence? If I don't use crooked ways, how can I kill people? Do I have to walk up to that person and say that I want to kill him, and then be beaten into a meat paste? The night wind blew gently. The old man sat up straight and stared at Ning Quebec. He could not suppress his inner anger because of this guy's stupidity and confusion. His slender hands clenched the back of the chair. It seemed that if nothing happened, he would directly slap Ning Ke's head. Ning Ke was so drunk that he could not notice these details. He poured the wine into his stomach and expressed his lament about life. Those lament about revenge, reluctance, and the moon became more and more repetitive and boring. They always revolved around some key words. Fortunately, he still subconsciously sealed most of his heart when he was drunk and did not say Xia Ho's name and who he was. Old man, I knocked on the building of pines and cranes with a silver note. How did you come here? You have never seen the moon, have you? Poor old man. So you are really rich. How do you earn your money? I earn it from the gambling house in the western city. Do you have any business with them? Don't be fooled by my ugly cotton-padded jacket. It is said that the style was designed by my dead teacher. Oh, you look so funny when you blow your beard. Ning Ke kept muttering and pointing at the old man in the chair and laughed. There was a muffled sound. The laughter stopped abruptly. Ning Ke covered his forehead and looked at the old man in front of him in shock and confusion. The old man held a very thick short stick in his hand and looked at him angrily. You are so full of nonsense. My scalp is swollen. How could you want to kill Xia Ho with such a look? Ning Ke did not hear the last sentence clearly. His eyes rolled up and he fainted. Just as his body leaned backward and was about to fall heavily on the balcony, a gust of wind blew. The old coat fluttered slightly and the straw shoes made no sound. Eldest brother of the academy appeared on the balcony and held Ning Ke, who was about to fall. He reached out his right hand and grabbed the jar of wine that was falling quickly. Holding the unconscious Ning Ke, eldest brother looked at the old man and asked blankly, Teacher, what happened to younger brother? The old man secretly put the short stick back into his sleeve and coughed awkwardly. He said, nothing. He offended my dignity, so I punished him with the academy rules. When the eldest brother saw the short wooden stick, he was so shocked that he almost fainted. He thought that his teacher had used this stick in his hand to banish the Taoist in Indigo to the South Sea. Tonight, he had used this thing to hit the youngest brother. Even if the youngest brother was not beaten to death, he would probably become an idiot after being saved. Thinking of this, eldest senior brother's face turned pale. The old man looked at his pale face and did not expect that he was worried about Ning Ke's safety. He frowned slightly and said, I told you to slow down 10 years ago. Why are you still so fast? Eldest brother came to the balcony of the building of pines and cranes with the wind because he sensed something wrong with Ning Quebec. He did not care about his own loss. He looked at the old man and said worriedly, Teacher, will younger brother be okay? The old man looked at the unconscious Ning Ke and said, This boy has learned the skills of your youngest uncle. His muscles and bones are unbelievably strong. He was just hit by a stick. How could he die so easily? Perhaps the old man felt that his words were not convincing. He coughed twice and explained very seriously, he has used too much energy today. It's good for him to sleep for a while. Eldest brother of the academy only had one teacher. That old man was naturally the legendary headmaster of the academy. The words of the headmaster of the academy were even more powerful than the imperial edict in the Tang Empire. For eldest brother who loved his teacher all his life, everything the headmaster of the academy said was the truth. If the headmaster of the academy said that the night was white, then it must be white. If the headmaster of the academy said that Haotian was black, then Haotian must be black. If the headmaster of the academy said that Ning Ke was fine, then Ning Ke would be fine no matter whether he was fine or not. On the streets of Chang and late at night, the headmaster of the academy walked slowly on the scattered dead leaves with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked very elegant. Eldest brother carried Ning Ke on his back and walked behind him with difficulty. You are right. There will always be a special one among thousands of lights. The headmaster of the academy looked at the faint lights in the alley and the patrolling soldiers of the Yulin royal guards in the distance. He said, Although your younger brother is not untainted by mud, nor is he a good person, there is still some affection in his seemingly cold-blooded and heartless body. It's just that the affection is hidden a little deeper. Chapter 1, next chapter before 10 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 369. The people in the city of Wei are still able to receive money and know how to take care of Sang Sang. I'm sure he will continue to respect you and little Mo in the future and have a sense of belonging to the academy. The headmaster turned around and looked at Ning Ke, who was in a coma. He smiled and said, Of course, these are all unimportant things. But I think they might affect the child's future choices. Eldest brother frowned slightly when he heard Sang Sang's name. But he did not comment on it. Instead, he suddenly said, I always remember this sentence in Love Lotus, which you wrote many years ago. The headmaster stopped and turned around to look at his favorite eldest disciple. He said slowly, That article was originally written about you. Eldest brother lowered his head and said, I don't deserve it. The headmaster said, There is no perfect person in the world. But in terms of morality and temperament, you are better than me, better than your youngest uncle, and better than anyone I've met in these years. But you did not do well in the matter a few days ago. You are not as good as Jun Mo. Eldest brother listened to his teacher's criticism in silence. Then he said, I'm afraid that the people of the Buddhism sect have seen something wrong with the big black umbrella on youngest brother's back. We have to be careful. The headmaster looked at him quietly and suddenly flicked his sleeves. The withered leaves on the street flew into the silent night sky, as if they were leaving some clues behind the stars. We haven't even found him in the underworld, let alone Yama. We haven't even found Yama's son. I feel sorry for that little girl, let alone this silly boy. The headmaster looked at Ning Ke, who was still in a coma, and smiled. Then, he calmly said, In the past, I've said that no one has the right to make judgments on things that cannot be understood or confirmed in the world, and even more so, we cannot cut off the development of any possibility just to eliminate a certain bad possibility, because living is the collection of countless possibilities. Eldest brother thought of the argument with his younger brother at the back of the mountain of the academy that night. He suddenly realized that he had forgotten what his teacher had taught him. Perhaps it was because he was too tired to carry Ning Ke on his back, or because he was too shocked, he suddenly sweated profusely and soaked his old coat. Teacher, I was wrong. The headmaster of the academy smiled and turned to walk forward. Eldest brother carried Ning Ke on his back and followed behind him. It was a late night at the end of winter. In an alley of Chang'an, a teacher walked calmly with his two most beloved students. No one knew where they would end up. Late at night in Chang'an City, more than 9,000 lights had been put out. Other than the lights on the walls of the imperial palace, only the bustling gambling houses and brothels in the western city were still lit. There were many ministers and wealthy businessmen living in the southern city, so it was heavily guarded. It was already dark, but there was still a mansion with lights on tonight. In the mansion of the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, Mrs. Xing sat on a round stool in the study, wiping away her tears. Her well-maintained face was full of sorrow and pity. Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, looked at her and sighed, saying, "Your daughter has been brought back. Why are you still so sad? She is still a little unfamiliar now, but in a few days, she will be able to call you mother. Don't be too anxious." Mrs. Zheng looked up at him and said sadly, "How can I not understand this? Do I have to force my daughter to do this today? I just feel that she has suffered too much over the years. As a mother, I always feel sad and guilty. I can't help but cry when I see her like this." Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, asked in surprise, "How is she?" The little building in Jingmin Garden that she lived in originally had 4 big and 4 small maids. But when I went there earlier, I found that the 8 maids had all been driven out by my daughter. When I went into the building and asked, "Do you know what my daughter said?" She said that she was only used to serving others and not being served. As Mrs. Xing spoke, her tears fell again. She looked at the Grand Secretary and said, "How do you think I, as a mother, feel when I hear this? And don't hide it from me. I know why you hesitated yesterday. You are worried that the Empress wants to win over the Academy, so you don't want your daughter to completely break off the relationship with her damned main family." Zheng Jing thought about the observation of the steward and had a better impression of Sang Sang. Although his daughter, whom he had not seen for many years, was not very talkative and seemed a little unlikable, she was actually calm, pleasant, and well-educated. He nodded and stroked his beard, thinking about the Empress's words. After a moment of silence, he said, "After all, she is our daughter. No matter what the Empress wants, she will not leave us. Don't worry." At this moment, there was a sudden clatter of hooves on the street outside the Grand Secretary's mansion. The academy was far away from the gate, but it was a quiet night, so the clatter was so clear and even soul-stirring. Zheng Jing frowned slightly, stood up, and looked out of the study. With the rapid footsteps, the steward of the Grand Secretary's mansion respectfully led a eunuch into the study. Zheng Jing looked at the eunuch's face, and his frown deepened. He waved his hand to dismiss all the servants, poured a cup of tea, and handed it to the eunuch. He opened his mouth but did not say anything. It was quiet in the study. Zheng Jing thought the Empress was inquiring about his daughter's return from the old brush pen shop, so he thought of many excuses in his mind. However, before he could speak, the eunuch smiled and said, "Your Excellency Zheng, this is the Emperor's decree." Zheng Jing was enlightened at first. No wonder it was Eunuch Lin who came. Then he was confused. In the past years of Tianqi era, the Tang Empire had been prosperous, and the people were peaceful. It was rare to see such an urgent decree in the middle of the night. Even if something happened at the border, the emperor would not send a eunuch to summon a civil official to the palace. Moreover, the eunuch was sent by the emperor, the head eunuch with the highest rank. Eunuch Lin did not give Zheng Jing more time to think, and said softly, "His Majesty is very happy to know about the reunion of the Grand Secretary and his daughter. He will probably send the relevant decree tomorrow, so he came to congratulate you tonight." There was no need to come late at night to congratulate him. Zheng Jing knew there must be more to the decree. As expected, Eunuch Lin continued, "But Sang Sang is still Ning Ke's handmaiden according to the household register." To prevent people from gossiping, His Majesty asked the Grand Secretary to send her back to the old brush pen shop tonight. Zheng Jing looked angry. He thought that His Majesty's order was completely unreasonable. There was no reason to separate his own flesh and blood. He said in a deep voice, I want to go to the palace to see His Majesty. Eunuch Lin seemed to have guessed that he would have such a reaction. He walked 2 steps forward and whispered in his ear, this is the order of the headmaster of the academy. Zheng Jing was shocked and asked in disbelief, the headmaster has returned to the capital? Eunuch Lin sighed and said, that's right. The headmaster of the academy hasn't spoken to the palace for many years. You should know the weight of his rare words. Even if he asks His Majesty to tear down the Daming Palace, I'm afraid His Majesty will really tear down the Daming Palace. His Majesty has regarded himself as a student of the headmaster of the academy and has never disobeyed him. Zheng Jing hesitated. Mrs. Zheng suddenly said in a trembling voice, I have lost her for more than 10 years. If my daughter doesn't want to leave, no one can take her away from me. Mrs. Zheng was not from a powerful family, nor did she have any relationship with the big families in Qinghe County. Before marrying Zheng Jing as a concubine, she was just an ordinary girl. In the Tang Empire, it was these ordinary people who had the simplest and most resolute feelings and views of right and wrong. In front of such simple and resolute feelings and views of right and wrong, power and strength often lost their original magic. Whether it was the headmaster of the academy or the emperor, they might have to temporarily avoid it. Eunuch Lin was slightly stunned. He secretly respected the Grand Secretary's wife and said softly, Madam, you have misunderstood. Of course, we have to listen to Miss Sang Sang first. His Majesty's decree is only for you not to stop her. I was wondering if you could let Miss Sang Sang come out and listen to me? Zheng Jing and his wife looked at each other and thought that since His Majesty had said so, it was indeed not good for them to be too tough. So they sent someone to Jingmin Garden to see if Sang Sang was asleep. Sang Sang naturally did not sleep well when she was not in the old brush pen shop. Last night, she kept her eyes open and looked at the complicated and beautiful patterns on the curtains. Tonight, she sat by the window in a daze. She came to the study. Eunuch Lin only said one sentence, Ning Ke is seriously injured. Sang Sang was silent for a moment and then turned to walk out of the study, as if she did not hear anything. After a moment, she came back with her luggage. She bowed to the Grand Secretary and his wife and said in a low voice, I will go and have a look. I will be back tomorrow. Then she thought for a moment and added, I will be back when he is better. The bamboo forest in the reception yard was blown by the night wind, like a dark blue sea, like the dense water grass in the ink lake in late autumn. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden did not know what senior brother Ning Ke and the Hill Master had said during the day, nor did they know what had happened. They were all sound asleep in their own rooms. Mo Shanshan did not sleep. She looked at the sections of calligraphy in front of her in the candlelight. They were all written by Ning Ke during the day. The ink was dry but still fresh, as if they still had the smell of that day. Zhuo Zhihua came in wearing an unlined garment. She looked at her face and said worriedly, what on earth happened? Why did you have to leave Chang'an in advance? Mo Shanshan looked at the sections of calligraphy in the candlelight and smiled. Her red lips were tightly pressed together, like the red line on the willow tree. In the Great River Kingdom, the red line on the willow tree represented marriage. I heard that Ning Ke was injured before he came today. Mo Shanshan frowned slightly and asked briefly, who? Daoshi monk from the Yueluan Kingdom. He challenged Ning Ke on the street in the morning and was beheaded. Zhuo Zhihua hesitated for a moment and said, I heard that Daoshi monk had been studying scriptures and worshipping Buddha in the Xiankong temple for many years. His state is very high, so I think Ning Ke must have been seriously injured. Mo Shanshan stood up and sat down slowly after a moment of silence. So you were injured when you were writing. But why didn't you tell me? The candle wick, which had not been cut for a long time, was slightly curled. The light was dim and reflected on the girl's white dress with a pale yellow color. But when it reflected on her face, it still could not hide the slight paleness. Try to finish the 2nd chapter and the 3rd chapter before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 370. Ning Ke woke up, but before he could open his eyes, he gasped. There was a sharp pain in his head, which made him a little confused. He could not remember the last scene in the building of pines and cranes last night. He was not sure whether the headache was caused by the hangover or something else. He thought for a long time and finally remembered the tall old man in fox fur and the thick short stick in the old man's hand. He also understood the cause of his headache. He could not help feeling angry and ashamed. He was angry that the old man dared to hurt him, and ashamed that as a core disciple of the headmaster of academy, he was beaten by an old rich man in Cheng and with a stick. Was he still lying on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes? Ning Ke thought about these questions and touched his body subconsciously. From the hardness of the brick bed and the smell of the bedding, he knew that he was lying in the old brush pen shop. Then who sent him back? Was it the shopkeeper of the building of pines and cranes or that hateful old man? The familiar smell of the bedding lingered in his nose. It was not a peculiar smell, but a smell that made him feel at ease. It was the smell of him and her. However, he smelled another smell that he was not familiar with but was very clear in his memory. The smell of beef and egg porridge made him feel lost for a moment, as if he had returned to the past. Many years ago, he took Sang Sang to the city of Wei to join the army. On the way, they passed by the town of Tushar and met a grassland barbarian chef who was selling beef porridge in the town. An old man in the town was very particular about breaking an egg into the beef congee. When the fresh beef came into contact with the egg that had just fallen to the grass in the morning, it immediately became an extremely fragrant, sweet, tender, and smooth delicacy. Even from afar, one could feel that it was extremely delicious. Sang Sang was very hungry for the bowl of beef and egg porridge, but Ning Ke did not buy it to save money. The two passed through the town in silence. Later, in the city of Wei, he followed the army to kill the horse gang for the first time. After getting the first money, Sang Sang made beef and egg porridge for 4 days in a row. Both of them felt a little sick. Then they realized that although beef and egg porridge was very nourishing, it actually tasted ordinary. So they never made it again. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at the white paper pasted on the roof. He smelled the aroma of beef and egg porridge coming in through the crack of the door. He rubbed his aching head and sat up. He pulled his outer coat from the foot of the Kong and put it on. Pushing open the door, he went to the courtyard. He saw that the neatly stacked firewood under the courtyard wall was a bit less, as if it had been stolen by rats in the night. There was a hole in the top row. He looked at the front of the shop and saw that the vegetables, rice, and roast duck that were left on the table the day before were gone. The table had been wiped clean and the floor had been mopped. There was no dust at all. A hot mist floated out of the kitchen. Ning Ke walked over and found that the leftover vegetables had been poured into the swill basin. The stove, which had been cold for 2 days, was warm again. A few small firewood were quietly burning inside. The porridge bowl on the stove was bubbling, constantly emitting steam and fragrance. There was a small stool in front of the stove. Sang Sang sat at the place she was most used to sitting. She looked at the firewood, listened to the sound of porridge, and controlled the heat. Her head was slightly drooping, as if she was a little tired. Her dark face was reflected by the firewood, and the yellowish hair floating in front of her forehead was curled even more by the heat. Ning Ke looked at her thin back. After a moment of silence, he walked up to her and patted her on the shoulder. Sang Sang woke up and looked up at him. She asked, "You're awake?" Ning Ke said, "It seems that you didn't sleep much last night." Sang Sang said, "Yes." Ning Ke said, "Then you go to sleep first. I'll make porridge." Sang Sang stood up from the small stool in front of the stove and wiped the slightly curled hair on her forehead to the back. When she walked to the door of the kitchen, she suddenly remembered something. She turned back and reminded him, "Watch the fire. Don't make it too big." Ning Ke said, "I know." Sang Sang said again, you can't drink. Drink less in the future. Ning Ke said, I know. Then he walked to the stove and sat on the small stool. He took out the most burning firewood from the hole of the stove and turned the windshield to make the firewood smaller. Sang Sang woke up at noon. She took out a towel and a toothbrush to wash up. She went into the kitchen to take a look at the porridge bowl and then walked to the front bed. There was a beautiful plate of peeled roast duck on the table in front of her. There were also 2 plates of vegetables with fresh spring onions and garlic. There was also a bowl of beef and egg porridge that was slightly burnt and appetizing. There were also 2 pairs of chopsticks and 2 empty bowls. Except for the beef and egg porridge cooked by Sang Sang, the other dishes were exactly the same as the day before yesterday. Ning Ke actually went to the market to buy vegetables and recooked the dishes while she was sleeping. Sang Sang looked at the dishes on the table and suddenly looked down at the small shoes outside her skirt. She whispered, have you recovered? If you have, I'll go back to the scholar's mansion. Ning Ke said, you don't have to go back. Sang Sang was startled. After thinking for a while, she walked to the table and picked up a bowl of porridge for him. She placed it in front of him and handed the chopsticks to him. Then she began to serve herself porridge. Eat. Ning Ke picked up a duck leg and put it in her bowl. Sang Sang said seriously, this is a dish, not rice. Ning Ke said, it's all the same. Then they began to eat quietly in the shop. Occasionally, he would pick up some vegetables for her. Occasionally, she would dip the duck skin in the sauce and put it into his bowl. Then, she would serve him a second bowl of porridge. Ning Ke suddenly laughed. Sang Sang laughed, too. A horse carriage stopped at the entrance of Lin 47th Street. Mo Shanshan sat by the window and lifted the curtain to look at the old brush pen shop not far away. The old brush pen shop was not closed. She could clearly see the scene in the shop and many details. Her eyes were still calm, but her eyelashes were slightly trembling. She had read the chicken soup calligraphy. And it was because of the rubbing of the note that she gradually imagined the man who wrote this note. So much so that she had developed feelings for him even before they met. And it was also because of this chicken soup calligraphy that she had been very familiar with the name at the top of the calligraphy since last summer. She even knew the importance of that name to Ning Ke earlier than himself. That was why she had been silent and thinking many times in the wilderness. That was why she had to see Sang Sang. She saw Sang Sang on the first day she entered Chang'an. To her surprise, she was just an ordinary handmaiden. Then she saw Sang Sang again today. And this time, she saw Sang Sang alone with Ning Quebec looking at Ning Ke and Sang Sang eating at the opposite table in the old brush pen shop. Mo Shanshan finally believed that these 2 people had been in a separate world many years ago. For them, everyone else in the world was outside the world, and everything was outside the world. It was difficult to leave their own shadows in that world. Just like eyes and eyelashes, the only difference was that the eyes could not see the eyelashes, and the eyelashes could not hurt the eyes. But when a strong wind blew from the outside, the 2 would notice each other's existence. But I am a mountain, not the wind. Mo Shanshan slowly put down the curtain, took out a letter and handed it to Zhuo Zhihua beside her. Zhuo Zhihua hesitated and said, are we really leaving Chang'an like this? Mo Shanshan calmly said, after all, Mr. First invited me here. Later, we will go to the academy in the southern suburbs. After seeing Mr. First, we will leave. Zhuo Zhihua sighed and no longer tried to persuade her. She took the letter and got off the carriage. After the meal, Sang Sang went to wash the dishes. Ning Ke sat at the table and opened the letter. The letter was written in Mo Shanshan's familiar handwriting. The young girl's handwriting was not elegant or delicate, but there was a sense of openness and determination that could not be hidden under her tranquil appearance. The last few paragraphs of the letter were like this. Maybe fate arranged for you to be in a separate world many years ago. There was no need for someone to stand outside the wooden door and knock, nor for someone to shout and disturb you under the winter tree outside the courtyard. But I don't believe in fate. I have benefited a lot from the journey in the wilderness. I am very happy to travel side by side in Cheng and in winter. In the snowy night and the red wall, you once said that you liked me. I once said that liking was not enough, and it turned out that it was indeed not enough. But at least you once said that you liked me, and I like it very much. Cheng is far from the great river kingdom, but it is not as far as the wilderness. If you really want to come, if you really want to go, it is very close. In the future, you will come to see me, or I will come to see you, or we will meet again in the clouds. It is all a happy thing in life. After so many things, the rivers and mountains in my eyes have a new meaning. When we meet again, what I write will be more magnificent than what I write today. I hope you will also work harder and not let me down. After reading the letter, Ning Ke was silent for a long time. Then he walked back to the bedroom in the backyard, lifted the bed board, and took out the box under it. He found that the silver notes in the box had been returned. Looking at the thick silver notes in the box, he could not help but smile. He knew that even if he did not say that before dinner, Sang Sang had already prepared to move back. He put the box back under the bed board, looked at the letter in his hand, thought for a moment, and threw it into the wastepaper basket beside the desk. Then he took the big black umbrella and told Sang Sang to wait for her in the front berth. After washing the dishes, Sang Sang began to fetch water. She had fetched water once in the morning the day before yesterday, and the water tank was basically full. Soon she finished her chores and habitually wiped the non-existent beads of sweat on her forehead. She walked back to the bedroom and started to change clothes. Then she saw the letter in the wastepaper basket. She was silent for a moment, carefully wiped her wet hands on the apron, and walked to the wastepaper basket to pick up the letter. Then she took out another box from a corner of the room and solemnly placed the letter in the deepest part of the box. Then she put the box back in its original position. This was Sang Sang's little black box, in which there were some things that Ning Ke had decided to throw away for some reason, but were very precious to him. For example, the funeral invitation that Ning Ke had copied on the rainy night after Zhuer's death. She knew that this letter was precious to Ning Ke, so she kept it. Walking out of the old brush pen shop, Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella and followed Ning Ke to the outside of Lin 47th Street. Ning Ke had long been used to her making the bed, washing the dishes, and holding the umbrella. But after a while, he suddenly took the big black umbrella from Sang Sang. Sang Sang raised her little face and looked at him with a puzzled look. He smiled and said, "Let's go." Sang Sang squinted her willowy eyes and nodded with a smile, yes. The first spring rain fell in Cheng and City, and it was as precious as oil. Under the umbrella, the master and the handmaiden looked at the curtain of rain, as if seeing the past and the future. The third chapter. There are still a few minutes before the end of today. Please vote for me if you have recommendation tickets. I will write the fourth chapter, but I don't know when it will be finished. Those who can't stay up late can go to bed first. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 371. In the first spring rain in the 15th year of Tianqi era, Ning Ke took Sang Sang to many places in Chang'an. Of course, the first place they went to was the Grand Secretary's mansion. After all, the Grand Secretary and his wife were Sang Sang's biological parents, and judging from what happened in the past few days, they really loved Sang Sang. Standing in the quiet study, Ning Ke felt a little nervous out of nowhere. It was totally different from the fierce and powerful look he had the day before yesterday. It was probably because he knew very well that in the future, even if he did not need the consent of the couple, he was born to be several heads lower than them in the eyes of the world. Grand Secretary Xing Jing and his wife knew Ning Ke's identity and naturally did not treat him as an ordinary person. They also knew that the relationship between their daughter and Ning Ke was not as simple as that of a master and a servant. Therefore, they treated Ning Ke with respect, vigilance, uneasiness, and scrutiny. Regarding Sang Sang's removal from the register, the people in the study tacitly did not mention it. Ning Ke did not want Sang Sang to be separated from him. Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, was thinking about the Empress's hope. Zheng Jing, on the other hand, was too busy holding Sang Sang's hand to care about how long she would stay in the old brush pen shop and the Grand Secretary's mansion. She did not notice it at all, and Sang Sang was too lazy to think about it. In the end, the two parties had a friendly talk and determined some basic principles for future communication. Ning Ke promised not to interfere with the family reunion of the Grand Scholar's mansion, and the Grand Scholar's mansion also vaguely admitted that Ning Ke had the priority and some derivative rights in some aspects. Then they parted happily. Then, they went to the princess mansion. Li Yu looked at the master and servant under the big black umbrella and sighed softly in her heart. She looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, "You should know very well why Her Majesty values this matter." Ning Ke had been busy looking for people to scold the monk in the lake for the past 2 days. He had not thought that this matter could be related to the palace. However, this matter was not complicated. He thought for a moment and understood the reason. After thinking for a while, he said, "I don't think I'm qualified to represent the Academy's attitude. And I think neither the headmaster nor eldest brother is interested in expressing their attitude on this matter." Li Yu said, "The problem is that if the royal family is unable to determine the direction of this matter, and the Tang Empire wants to be stable and everlasting, we need the Academy to show its attitude." Ning Ke said, "I believe the civil and military officials will have their own preferences. What if the civil and military officials are divided into 2 factions and can't come to an agreement?" Li Yu looked into his eyes and did not give him any chance to dodge. She said, "Although the Academy is not involved in politics, the attitude of the Academy is very important to the civil officials. Although the military is relatively distant from the Academy, once the Academy expresses its stance, I believe that no general will dare to oppose it." Ning Ke furrowed his brows and remained silent. Why do the disciples of the 2nd floor of the Academy need to enter the human realm? Because the Academy exists in the Tang Empire, and the Academy itself needs the Tang Empire to be at peace for a long time. Since you are a person who has entered the human realm, you have to bear this responsibility. Ning Ke sighed, "It seems a little heavy." Li Yu said, "Master Yen Sei has entrusted the safety of the entire Chang and city to you. The burden on your shoulders is already very heavy. So what if you add these to it? Don't worry when you have too many debts, and don't itch when you have too many lice. Is this the logic?" Ning Ke sighed and said, "When we return to Chang and together, Your Highness, you should be very clear that I am just a very insignificant person. Now, in less than 2 years, I have to bear so many responsibilities. I really am not mentally prepared. And to be honest, I don't think I have this ability." Li Yu said, "Who asked you to become the disciple of the headmaster of the Academy and Master Yen Sei? Your experience in Chang, and during the 2 years you have been in Chang, and does not seem to be very steep. You have climbed up with your own perseverance. However, if you look back from the results, I am afraid that there has not been a person as lucky as you in the Tang Empire in the past 500 years. I am not able to bear the safety of Chang and city yet. As for the continuation of the Tang Empire, there will be others to worry about." Your Highness's words just now really disturbed me. Ning Ke suddenly understood something and felt a lot more relaxed. He said, "If there is really a problem or situation that I cannot solve, I can ask the headmaster and senior brothers and sisters. I believe that they must be much more intelligent than me. At that time, I will at most be the guy who enters the palace to convey the Academy's opinion." After a moment of silence, Li Yu looked at him and said with a smile, "I hope that when you enter the palace, you will see me." Ning Ke said, "I only hope that when you see me in the palace, you will not be disappointed." The first spring rain came and went quietly. After a while, it disappeared without a trace and turned into a soft dampness on the black eaves and white walls of Chang and city. It did not make the streets colder, but only washed the face of the winter trees that had not yet sprouted and moistened their bodies. Sang Sang took the big black umbrella that Ning Ke handed over and tied it on her back. She looked up at him and said, Why are the words that you and Her Highness always so difficult to understand? They are all very simple words. Ning Ke thought of the young forces that Li Yu had been cultivating in the court and the military all these years and said, "It is just that the person who speaks is more complicated." Sang Sang said, "You did not say that she is an idiot today." Ning Ke replied, "Although I still think that what she did was a bit idiotic, she is after all your friend and has a good relationship with me. It is good to be kind to her." They then went to the House of Red Sleeves, went to the gambling house in the western city, and even walked around the imperial city. They met Mistress Jian, Mr. Qi, Su Chongshan and others. Ning Ke did not stay in these places for too long and did not say anything. He just appeared in front of them with Sang Sang, which was enough to express his meaning clearly. Sang Sang has returned. You don't have to worry about her safety, and don't have to worry about Ning Ke's murderous aura that was about to tear the entire Chang and city apart. When they left the imperial palace and passed by the Southern Gate Temple, Ning Ke suddenly thought of what Ming Qi had said. He looked at Sang Sang and asked, "Although I hate that old man, you are after all his only successor. I heard that the Westhill Divine Palace has always wanted to take you back, which means that you may become the great divine priest of light in the future. What do you think of this?" Sang Sang said, "Teacher did not ask me to go to the Westhill." Ning Ke smiled and said, "I don't mean to ask you to go to the Westhill either. I just occasionally think that my Sang Sang can actually become the great divine priest of light, and I find it very interesting. A great divine priest of light serving you tea, making your bed, and even warming your bed is indeed something to be proud of. But if billions of Haotian Taoism believers in the world know your evil thoughts, do you believe that even if you enter the back of the mountain of the academy, you will be drowned by their spittle?" Chen Pippi appeared in front of them and looked at Ning Ke mockingly. Ning Ke looked at him and asked, "Why can you always find me so easily?" Chen Pippi said, "Because you have a strong smell of shamelessness." Ning Ke did not want to argue with him and asked, "What do you want from me today?" He suddenly remembered that Chen Pippi mentioned by the lake at the foot of Yanming Mountain that the academy held a big meeting, but everyone quarreled without any result. Seventh sister said that she wanted to take him back for interrogation. He could not help but ask vigilantly, "Senior brothers and senior sisters, why did they quarrel like this? Must I go back to participate? Are you trying to trick me to go back and make me their punching bag instead of you?" Chen Pippi glanced at Sang Sang beside him and said, "That matter has been solved." Ning Ke asked in surprise, "How?" Chen Pippi said, "Because someone solved it himself, so senior brothers and senior sisters also solved it." Sang Sang gently pulled Ning Ke's sleeve and reminded him, "He seems to be talking about you." Ning Ke nodded and said, "I can also hear that there is something strange about this matter." Then he looked at Chen Pippi and asked, "Since the matter has been solved, why did you come to me again?" Chen Pippi answered, "To ask you to return to the academy." Ning Ke asked, "What happened?" Chen Pippi said, "Because the headmaster is back." Ning Ke did not speak for a long time under the lonely wondersuite that poked out of the wall of the Southern Gate Temple. Ever since he entered the academy, he had been looking forward to the day he could meet his teacher, the legendary headmaster of the academy. However, the headmaster of the academy was always traveling outside and did not appear even when eldest brother appeared. Until now, someone suddenly ran over and said that the headmaster of the academy had returned to Chang'an. This was too sudden. Ning Ke did not know what kind of person the headmaster of the academy was. In fact, he had not heard of any other legendary deeds of the headmaster of the academy other than the disappearance of the Peach Mountain of Westhill. However, he was very clear that a person who could be youngest uncle's senior brother and a person who could teach people like eldest brother and second brother must be an extremely legendary person. And such a person was his own teacher. Every time he thought of this, he would feel proud and proud. Today, he was finally going to meet his teacher. He was so nervous and anxious that he wanted to escape subconsciously. "I haven't brushed. I brushed my teeth, but I'm still not ready. Look at my winter clothes. I haven't washed them for a few days. There are still porridge stains on them. Ning Ke pointed at the beef and egg porridge stains on his chest and explained very seriously and nervously, "I think I should go back to take a bath and cleanse myself, and then change into new clothes before returning to the academy." "Take a bath and cleanse yourself?" Chin Pippi looked at him and said very seriously, "If the headmaster knows that you have done these things, he will definitely ask second brother to make you into a meat pie. Because the headmaster thinks that only the deceased can enjoy such treatment, which is equivalent to saying that you regard him as a dead person." Ning Ke did not know that he had already scolded the headmaster of the academy for being an old man on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes. Therefore, when he heard Chin Pippi's threat, he immediately turned evil and said that he would immediately go back to the academy with him. He looked at Sang Sang and was ready to let her go back to the old brush pen shop first. "Let's go together." Chin Pippi glanced at Sang Sang and said, "The headmaster is probably very curious about the little handmaiden of the candidate for the divine priest of light, so he specially asked you to bring her along." Ning Ke nodded. Except for him, Sang Sang had an indifferent attitude towards everything in the world. Since he agreed to let her go, then she would go with them. However, the three of them were forced to stop before they could walk out of Chang'an City. Because the vermilion bird street in front of the south gate of Chang'an City was crowded with people. They did not know what kind of bustle could attract so many people after the rain. Chin Pippi stood on tiptoe and looked into the crowd. He saw a long bench in the empty space in the middle of the crowd. A white dog was lying under the bench. A little girl was lying on the bench. The little girl was wearing a shabby leather coat. There was a heavy strip-shaped stone on the coat. "Today is over. It will be a new day soon. Continue to work hard." Then the recommendation votes have been obtained. Please vote for more. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 372. The little girl's shabby leather coat was a little thin. It seemed that it would break along with her small body at any time. The people who saw this scene could not help but feel a little frightened. A man in ragged clothes stood beside the bench. His expression was dull, but his eyes were full of fear. He held the iron hammer high in his hands, but could not smash it down no matter how hard he tried. Some of the Chang'an people who were watching turned away and did not dare to look. Some tried to dissuade him, some were too nervous to speak, and some were so excited that they could not take their eyes off her. The white dog under the leg of the bench was bored and lying on its front leg. Smashing a big stone on the chest? Chin Pippi looked at the scene in the crowd and said incredulously. Ning Ke was also a little surprised. It was said that smashing a big stone on the chest was rarely seen in Chang'an City because it was too cliché. However, it was extremely rare that it was a little girl who smashed a big stone on the chest. Chin Pippi said worriedly, "Such a big stone is going to crush the little girl to death, let alone the hammer. This can't do. We have to stop it. It's too dangerous." After saying this, he squeezed into the crowd, wanting to stop this from happening. However, before he could go over, the little girl on the bench seemed to glare at the man next to her. The man seemed to be greatly frightened. His hands went limp, and the iron hammer fell to the ground. There was a muffled sound. The heavy stone on the little girl broke into countless pieces and fell from the side of the bench. One of the stones hit the white dog by the leg of the bench. The white dog shook its head. The streets of the South City Gate were completely silent. People looked at the motionless little girl on the bench and wondered if she had been crushed to death. Some people's faces showed that they could not bear it. At this moment, the little girl nimbly turned over from the bench and brushed off the dust on her body. She looked at the man beside her and said angrily, "That day in the ruined temple, I picked you because of your strength. But how can you have any effect if you don't dare to use your strength? Don't do this next time." Only then did the surrounding crowd come to their senses. Looking at the little girl with a childish face and her nonchalant appearance, they realized that she was completely fine. They couldn't help but cheer and applaud excitedly. For a moment, the sound of cheers and whistles resounded through the long street. The little girl took off the leather hat on her head and walked towards the crowd of onlookers. Her long black braid, which was previously stuffed in the hat, hung down to her knees and swayed non-stop. The little girl's smile was childish and cute, and her words were neat and clean. The people of Chang and City had already admired her to the extreme when they saw her breaking the big stone on her chest. Now that they saw that she was cute, there was no reason for them not to pay. Soon, the leather hat in her hand was stuffed with copper coins. The little girl held a hat full of heavy copper coins and smiled even more happily. There were also some kind-hearted people of Chang and City who scolded the poor man, saying that no matter how poor he was, he should not let his young sister do such a dangerous thing. They also said that if they saw him breaking the big stone on the little girl's chest again in Chang and City, they would definitely ask the Chang and local government to arrest him and bring him back for punishment. The little girl found the stone pebble from a hole in the front of her fur coat and threw it away. She walked to the side of the man and patted her little chest. She smiled and explained to the crowd, "Thank you for your concern, but I'm really fine. I've trained to urinate." The action of patting her chest was extremely heroic, but she was still a young girl with small palms and breasts. This action naturally made her look a bit more cute, which made the crowd laugh kindly. Chin Pippi opened his mouth and stared at the little girl like a frightened idiot. He said, "This little girl is really cruel. Isn't she worried that she can't feed the child in the future if her chest is flattened?" His eyes fell on the little girl's chest and he suddenly said, "Anyway, she doesn't have any chest." Ning Ke slightly lowered his head and glanced at Chin Pippi's chest. Chin Pippi knew that he was saying that his chest was big because he was fat, so he turned his head away in shame. Ning Ke looked at the scene and his body suddenly stiffened. The scene of breaking the big stone on the chest had surprised him, but when he saw the little girl's clear face, he was suddenly shocked speechless. "You take Sang Sang to the academy first. I have something to do and will be there soon," he said to Chin Pippi. Chin Pippi looked at him with some confusion and reminded him, "Don't go to the incense bath and change clothes." Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, "I won't." Chin Pippi said in a serious tone, "You will see the teacher eventually. Don't think about slipping away." Ning Ke sighed and said, "I understand the logic of an ugly daughter-in-law meeting her parents-in-law." In a quiet alley on the side of Vermilion Bird Avenue, Ning Ke looked down at Tang Xiaotang in front of him and said with emotion, "I am wondering if you are crazy. Why are you in Chang and City?" The little girl who broke the big stone on the chest at the south gate was naturally Tang Xiaotang. Other than this girl from the Devil's Doctrine, which girl in the world could have such an inhuman body strength? Tang Xiaotang looked up at him and said, "My brother asked me to come to Chang'an." Ning Ke was startled and said, "Then your brother is crazy." Tang Xiaotang said unhappily, "You are crazy. I told you in the Hulun Sea that I would come to Chang'an City to play with you. Why are you like this as soon as we meet?" Ning Ke could not understand the thinking and logic of this brother and sister from the Devil's Doctrine. He gasped and said, "Come to Chang'an City to play? Don't you know that this is the Central Plains, this is the Tang Empire, this is Chang'an City, and Tang Xiaotang is the legendary remnant of the Devil's Doctrine?" Tang Xiaotang looked at him in confusion and asked, "So what?" "What?" Ning Ke looked at the entrance of the alley vigilantly and angrily circled around the tree in the alley. He bent down and stared into her eyes. He said, "A remnant of the Devil's Doctrine appearing in Chang'an City is like a little white rabbit running to the side of a big black bear that is taking a dump. It is like a moth flying into a raging fire." Tang Xiaotang smiled and comforted him. "So you are worried about this? Don't be afraid. The disciples of the Enlightenment Doctrine do not have any aura fluctuations. The cultivators here can't even tell who we are. So many seniors of the Enlightenment Doctrine were hiding in the Central Plains, and nothing happened." Ning Ke looked at the little girl's childish face and did not know what to say. He forcibly suppressed his anger and explained seriously, "It is not like it was in the past. Indeed, no one would think that a remnant of the devil's doctrine would dare to appear in broad daylight. But what did you do just now? You actually broke the big stone on the chest. When you become famous in Chang'an City, do you think the Imperial Center administration will not be able to find out where you came from?" He continued, "Even if the guys in black from the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall can't enter Chang'an City to catch you, do you think no one will do anything to you? The people of Chang'an City who pitied you and admired you before can applaud you now. But if they know that you are from the devil's doctrine, they will definitely swallow you alive. Don't forget that we Tangs also believe in Haotian." Tang Xiaotang innocently spread her hands and looked very cute. She said, "It is too far from the wilderness to Chang'an City. I spent all my money when I reached capital Cheng. I begged along the way and thought that begging in Chang'an City would bring shame to the academy and you. That is why I wanted to make money by performing." Ning Ke was slightly stunned. Then he noticed that Tang Xiaotang's leather coat was even more tattered than when they met in the wilderness. The front of the small leather boots on her feet was even cracked. She must have suffered a lot during the long journey. Looking at the little girl at this moment, he could not help but think of the scene of him and Sang Sang wandering in the world many years ago. He could not bear to blame her again. Feeling a little strange, he did not notice the description of shame in Tang Xiaotang's previous words. Tang Xiaotang said with a smile, "The Tangs are really nice. There are people everywhere along the way. Some people even helped me find the government officials. When I begged, they cooked new food for me several times. No one has ever harmed me. And you are also very nice to me. You have never thought of killing me." Ning Ke had no interest in killing the devil. Moreover, he had now joined the devil. In other words, he and the little girl in front of him were the same kind. How could he have any hostility or killing intent? After thinking for a moment, he took out a few pieces of silver and stuffed them into Tang Xiaotang's hand. He said, "Go to the building of pines and cranes and book a private room to eat. Wait for me to come back." Suddenly he thought of the sinister old man who hid a wooden stick in his sleeve on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes last night. It seemed to be dangerous there, so he simply handed her a key. There is a shop called the Old Brush Pen Shop on Lin 47th Street in the Eastern City. It is mine. Go there and wait for me to come back. I remind you not to climb over the wall. You must go through the door. And don't touch anything inside." Thinking that the headmaster of the academy was still waiting for him in the academy, Ning Ke really had no time to say anything more to Tang Xiaotang. After quickly telling her these things, he ran out of the south gate like a gust of wind. Holding the silver in one hand and the key in the other, Tang Xiaotang looked at Ning Ke's hurried back. She wanted to tell him that she had somewhere to go, but it was too late. She could only shrug her shoulders cutely. These days, the big black horse had been left to roam in the back mountain of the academy. So Ning Ke did not ride a horse or take a carriage. After walking out of the south gate of Chang'an, he walked into the deep withered grass beside the official road. He began to run with the great power he had obtained after joining the devil and his seemingly tireless body. The stubborn winter grass and the even more stubborn insects slapped his cheeks from time to time. He squinted his eyes and ran wildly. It did not take long for him to reach the side door of the academy in the southern suburbs. On the official road not far away, there was a fleet of carriages slowly heading south. Ning Ke looked there and guessed that the carriages should be the girls of the Great River Kingdom who had left Chang'an. Looking at the gradually fading carriages, he was silent for a long time. Then he turned around and walked into the academy. Then he saw a little girl standing in the deep winter grass beside the road. This little girl had just broken up with him in Chang'an and had quickly reunited with him. In the winter grass, Tang Xiaotang was slightly panting. She looked at him and said, "You really run fast." Chapter 1. Chapter 2, Try to finish before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 373. Looking at Tang Xiaotang in the grass, Ning Ke was stunned. He sighed and asked, "Are you a ghost? Why do you follow me wherever I go? No matter how fast I run, it doesn't seem to work." Tang Xiaotang did not have time to react to his unfriendly tone. That snow-white puppy rushed out from behind her, baring its sharp teeth and growling at Ning Quebec. However, it was probably because the memory of being ravaged by Ning Ke in the wilderness was too deep. It only dared to stand in front of its master to show its wildness, and did not dare to take a step closer to Ning Quebec. "You run really fast. I almost thought you were from the Enlightenment doctrine," Tang Xiaotang said, "but no matter how fast you run, you can't be faster than me." Ning Ke asked helplessly, "My little lady, what do you want to do with me?" Tang Xiaotang said, "My brother wants me to enter the academy and be a student of the headmaster of the academy." Ning Ke was stunned for a long time before he could confirm that he did not hear wrongly. He could not help but have the urge to burn all the winter grass in front of him. He said, "You two siblings are really crazy. How can you want to be a student of the headmaster of the academy? Don't you know that my teacher is the leader of the righteous faction in the Central Plains? Well, even though he rarely appears, at least he is a spiritual leader. Even if he doesn't use violent means to subdue you, do you think he will accept you as a disciple?" Tang Xiaotang said confusedly, "My brother said that the academy has always taught everyone without discrimination." Ning Ke said, "Anyway, I advise you to give up. I can't bring you to the back of the mountain of the academy. Besides, I am now the most favored younger brother. Why should I have a younger sister like you?" After saying this, he turned around and walked along the slightly slanted stone path towards the green slope on the side of the academy. However, no matter how fast he walked, Tang Xiaotang and the little white puppy could always keep up with him. Tang Xiaotang laughed behind him and said, "If the headmaster of the academy knew that you are such a shameless guy, he might not like you and might even kick you out. Then wouldn't I be able to fill in your vacancy?" Ning Ke thought that he was willing to do anything in his life and was used to flattering others. He thought of the generals in the city of Wei, Master Yen Sei, and eldest brother. How could the headmaster of the academy escape from his control? Can we meet again? I've been begging Buddha for thousands of years." At this moment, a singing voice suddenly came from below the stone path. The singer's voice was not very beautiful. It was not hoarse, but there was a strange old aura to it. Coupled with the lyrics and the fact that he was tone deaf, he sang the melody as if he was speaking, which made it even more absurd and comical. Tang Xiaotang curiously turned her head and looked behind her. Although the melody was very strange to Ning Ke, he felt that he had heard the lyrics somewhere before. Suddenly, he came to his senses. How could anyone else know this song besides him? He looked down the stone path and saw a tall old man wearing a dark and expensive fox fur coat, carrying a lacquered food box, walking up the slope. Wasn't he the man from the building of pines and cranes last night? Looking at the old man, Ning Ke felt a sharp pain in his head. He thought of the short wooden stick that had sneakily attacked him and a cold smile appeared on his lips. He was ready to stop the old man and beat him up. This was the principle behind the so-called revenge and revenge, returning a stick with a fist. Ning Ke knew that even if he was drunk, he still had the strength to fight. However, he was knocked out by the old man with a stick. This old man must not be an ordinary rich man in Chang'an. He was naturally vigilant. The great spirit in his body slowly circulated and his hands grasped the air as if he was holding a knife. In a moment, he was ready to fight. Suddenly, he glimpsed the little white dog hiding behind Tang Xiaotang's small leather boots. Its ears were drooping and it was whimpering in fear. He could not help but feel a little moved. He knew that the little white dog was not a dog, but a real snow wolf in the wilderness. No matter how much the white wolf feared him, it did not have the slightest intention of surrendering to him. Then why did it behave like this at this time? Could it be that the old man had made it instinctively feel fear? Ning Ke had been fighting in the grassland of Min Mountain for many years. He did not know how many thrilling situations he had encountered. His reaction speed had long been tempered to be extraordinarily fast. At this time, it was just a tiny detail, but it was like a spark falling on a pile of hay. It ignited a raging flame in his mind and made him think of a certain possibility. This was the academy. The tall old man in fox fur was very powerful. Thinking of that possibility, Ning Ke's heart moved slightly. Then, he quickly turned cold and trembled because of the shock. At this critical moment, he perfectly displayed his control over his emotions and body. Looking at the old man walking up the stairs, he did not show any extra emotions on his face. The sneer that had just appeared on the corner of his mouth seemed to have met the sunlight, and suddenly bloomed like a flower with incomparable warmth. The great spirit in his body melted silently like snow in spring, and his hands that were holding the hilt naturally raised into fists in front of his chest. He bowed slightly and said gently, "I didn't expect to see you again, old sir." The headmaster carried the food box and walked up the slope. He looked at Ning Ke in front of him with interest, but did not speak. Ning Ke looked back at the headmaster calmly. His facial expression and body posture did not show any abnormalities. However, only he knew that in a place where the headmaster could not see, his body that was about to collapse from the pressure was fiercely fighting against his strong willpower. Dozens of beads of sweat slowly and quietly seeped out from his back, gradually wetting the back of his clothes. Because he had to use his willpower to forcibly control his body's instinctive fear and reaction, even though he looked calm and the smile in his eyes was gentle and sweet, in fact, he had already used 120% of his strength. The soles of his feet were piercing, and his calves and abdomen were in pain. He could cramp at any time. The headmaster suddenly opened his mouth and said, "I am just an ordinary old man. You do not need to be so serious." Ning Ke said indignantly, "Who dares to say that you are an ordinary old man?" The headmaster's tall body slightly leaned forward and looked down at him. When Ning Ke felt a little scared, he smiled and said, "But last night, someone said that I am a poor old man." Ning Ke felt that something was wrong, but he still wanted to put up a last-ditch struggle. He forced a smile and said, "Last night, I was talking nonsense after drinking. Someone like you would not care about a young man like me." The headmaster sighed and said, "Before I die of old age, I decided to take in one last student. In the end, before I die, I became the dead teacher in his words. Why should I bother?" Ning Ke felt like he was struck by lightning, but he still insisted on playing dumb and pretending that he did not understand. The headmaster looked at him and smiled. He said, "You are really good at playing dumb. But your clothes are already wet, and your feet are about to crush that stone. Why are you still pretending?" Ning Ke was like a broken wine jar when he was directly exposed. He no longer had the strength to persist and fell to the ground with a cry. He desperately rubbed his cramped calves and soles of his feet. The headmaster looked at him sitting on the ground and sighed. He shook his head and continued to walk up the slope with the food box. The sigh was very light, but it sounded like thunder in Ning Ke's ears. He thought that the headmaster was completely disappointed in him. What should he do? He had gone through thousands of difficulties in this life, and he did not know how many times he had been on the brink of death before he finally walked into the back of the mountain of the academy and had the life he had today. Everything he had was because of this teacher that he had never met. How could he watch all of this go to waste? Ning Ke bounced up from the ground as if he had been stung. He ran forward with a limp and respectfully followed behind the headmaster. He reached out and wanted to carry the food box for the old man. The headmaster did not hand the food box to him. He looked at Tang Xiaotang, who was standing in the grass in a daze, and waved his hand to call her over. Then, he handed the food box to her. Tang Xiaotang finally woke up at this time. From Ning Ke's expression and the previous conversation, she confirmed the identity of this tall old man. She took the heavy food box with her little hand and looked at Ning Ke with a smile. Then, she happily followed the headmaster into the academy with the little white wolf. Looking at the tall and solemn back of the headmaster on the slanting stone steps, Ning Ke was extremely depressed. He had thought that as the youngest student on the second floor of the academy, he would be the legendary youngest. With his ability to be thick-skinned, black-hearted, and sweet, he would definitely be able to make the headmaster happy and be doted on in the academy in the future. However, who would have thought that the old man on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes, who did not look like a decent person, and who had been teased by him for half a night, was his teacher? And looking at the current situation, the headmaster might really take Tang Xiaotang into the second floor of the academy. Wouldn't that mean that he would lose his position as the youngest and naturally protected? Walking out of the mountain fog, they came to the cliff yard at the back of the mountain. No one knew where the headmaster had gone. Tang Xiaotang stood under a ginkgo tree and was enjoying the beautiful scenery of the academy's back of the mountain. Ning Ke walked to her side and remained silent. The little white wolf was running on the meadow at the foot of the hill. It had probably never seen such a green meadow in the wilderness. It was extremely excited and actually ran faster and faster, almost turning into a white lightning. Suddenly, a black bolt of lightning shot out from the side and instantly surpassed the little white wolf. Like a black rain cloud, it enveloped the little white wolf's entire body. It was the big black horse. The little white wolf was scared silly by the big black horse's imposing manner. Those hooves that were like big trees, and hearing those war drum-like hooves, it was so scared that it shrank into a ball and did not dare to move. Ning Ke sneered and was ready to boast to Tang Xiaotang, who was beside him. However, it was indeed not suitable for him to sneer today. Because in the next moment, the sneer that had just appeared on his lips once again turned into a helpless and embarrassed expression. Because the big black horse that looked rather imposing was actually a deserter. A big white goose was chasing from the other end of the meadow. Its movements looked comical, but it was extremely fast. Especially its high neck, it looked like the ancient crown on a certain person's head. It was extremely proud. Catching a glimpse of the big white goose, the big black horse neighed in fear. Its four hooves were flying, and it once again galloped towards the other end of the meadow as fast as lightning. It could not stop panting, looking extremely aggrieved. I actually regret it. Boo-hoo. This is the second chapter. The next chapter will definitely be very late. I will write it slowly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 374. Looking at the big black horse running away in panic, Ning Ke suddenly understood one thing. As the youngest disciple, he was likely to be the most favored, but in terms of seniority, he had the least status. Because he did not know how the headmaster of the academy would think of him, he felt uneasy. Looking at the scene in front of him, he could not help feeling sad and said angrily, "Whose goose is this? How could it be so insensible to bully my big black horse? Young sir, this is the goose raised by my young master." A timid voice sounded from the meadow, and second brother's little attendant walked out. Of course, Ning Ke knew that the big white goose was second brother's pet. Previously, when second brother was not around, he used the goose to vent his emotions. Now that the little attendant had appeared, even if Yi Hongyu had the guts to lend him, he would not dare to really pull the big white goose over and kick it. He reached out to touch the little attendant's pink face and sighed, "I just said it casually. Don't take it to heart, and don't remember it." The little attendant opened his eyes wide, nodded hard, and then went to chase the goose. At this time, the big white goose had already chased the big black horse to the mirror lake. The little white wolf that had curled up into a ball and pretended to be dead in the grass confirmed that those terrifying fellows had disappeared. Only then did it cowardly stand up and run back to Tang Xiaotang's side with its furry tail between its legs. It didn't dare to leave even half a step. It was so frightened that even walking seemed to be a little weak. Tang Xiaotang held it in her arms. The little white wolf felt a lot safer. It poked its head out of her arm and looked at the direction of the lake. It looked at the black shadow and white smoke that was chasing after the white smoke. It thought that this place was too strange. Even a talented snowfield direwolf prince with noble bloodline didn't seem to be ranked in this place. Ning Ke did not know that the little white wolf in Tang Xiaotang's arms had very similar feelings with him, or he might hold the little white wolf in his arms and cry bitterly. Chin Pippi and Sang Sang stood by the mirror lake and waited. When he saw clearly the little girl beside Ning Ke, he could not help but be shocked. He thought to himself, isn't this the little girl who broke the big stone on the chest at the south gate? How did she enter the back of the mountain of the academy? I've been in the academy for so many years. Except for Sang Sang the calligraphy addict, no one else can enter the cliff plateau. I really want to know who this little girl is in your family. She doesn't belong to my family. The headmaster let her in. Hearing Ning Ke's answer, Chin Pippi was even more surprised. He looked at the little girl in the tattered leather coat and gradually frowned. Thinking of the old coat that eldest brother always wore, he hesitantly asked, "Teacher brought her in? Could it be that this little girl is from eldest senior brother's family?" Ning Ke walked to Sang Sang and listened to Chin Pippi's wild guesses. He said angrily, "Stop guessing. You won't be happy even if you know who she is." Chin Pippi looked at the little girl who was holding a white puppy and liked her more and more. He said with a smile, "She's just a little girl. How could she make me unhappy?" Tang Xiaotang looked at the fat man and remembered the conversation between Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu on the mountain road in the wilderness. In the conversation, there was a guy who was said to be very talented in cultivation but had an extremely bad temperament. She asked curiously, "Are you the fat genius Ning Ke mentioned who knew his destiny at a young age?" Chin Pippi nodded slightly proudly. He thought that Ning Ke's younger brother did not forget to tell others about his senior brother's genius when he was traveling outside. He was about to pat Ning Ke's shoulder when he suddenly thought of the last 3 words of the little girl, fat. He looked a little annoyed. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "Yi Hongyu called me fat. If you don't like it, you can go to the West Hill Divine Palace and ask her to solve the problem. Then forget it." Hearing Yi Hongyu's name, Chin Pippi felt a headache and quickly made a decision. He was a very smart person. He thought that Ning Ke had only met Yi Hongyu in the wilderness, so according to the little girl, she was also there. He could not help but ask in surprise, "So you met in the wilderness?" Ning Ke nodded. Chin Pippi said, "Then why didn't you say so at the city gate?" Ning Ke said, "Because I didn't want you to know each other." Chin Pippi looked at Tang Xiaotang's blushing face, clean eyebrows, and the little braid that swayed around her knees. He thought that if it was untied, it would be a head of beautiful black hair. He could not help but feel moved. This was the appearance of his favorite girl. Suddenly, he remembered that he had once told Ning Ke about this. He turned around and stared at Ning Quebec. He thought that Ning Ke knew that he liked this kind of girl, but he did not want him to know her. What was his intention? Ning Ke thought that since the headmaster of the academy had allowed Tang Xiaotang to enter the academy, she could not hide her identity forever. After a moment of silence, he said mockingly, "She is Tang's sister." Chin Pippi waved his hand generously and said, "So what?" Ning Ke reminded him again, "Tang, Tang Tang, the Tang who lies in the hot water." Chin Pippi was very confused. Ning Ke sighed and said, "Tang from the devil's doctrine." Chin Pippi then came to his senses. He pointed at Tang Xiaotang and could not say anything for a long time. "I remember that you said that there was no girl stronger than you. I wished that the girl you liked would have the fiercest brother in the world. Now it seems that both conditions have been met. And I have to remind you of one thing. Yi Hongyu said that if you were to fight, you would not be this little girl's match." Ning Ke patted him on the shoulder to express his most sincere comfort. Tang Xiaotang did not understand what the two were talking about. She was only interested in Chin Pippi, the fat man. She did not understand why Yi Hongyu thought that he was an absolute loser in terms of fighting when he was the youngest cultivation genius to enter the knowing destiny state. He could not even beat her. She smiled and introduced herself. I am Tang Xiaotang. Chen Pipi looked at the girl from the Devil's Doctrine and said after a moment of silence, I am Chen Pipi. Tang Xiaotang felt that her brother had mentioned this name before. She lowered her head and thought for a while. Finally, she remembered and said happily, I remember now. You are Yi Su's younger brother. Chen Pipi said after a moment of silence, yes, I am. Although there are differences between the Taoists and the Devil's Doctrine, and the abbey and the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine are irreconcilable, I should kill you right now. But since this is the academy and you are brought here by the headmaster, you can rest assured that I will not do anything to you for now. Tang Xiaotang's childish face was full of excitement. She looked at him and said happily, it doesn't matter. How about we fight first? I have always wanted to fight with you. Chen Pipi looked at her face and could not help but think of his miserable childhood in the abbey many years ago. He thought of the little girl who liked to wear red dresses and fight with him. He was silent and then began to feel sad and angry. At this moment, a clear sound of flute came from the distant mountains. The mountain was really big. Ning Ke had studied in the back mountain of the academy for a long time, but he had only been to some places. It was the first time for him to see the hut where the disciples of the academy gathered today. The hut was very big and was made of beams and pillars. There were no walls on all sides and it was very spacious. Fortunately, it was located in the deep valley of the back mountain, so it did not feel cold. No one knew where the frost-white grass on the eaves came from. There was a row of bamboo chairs in front of the hut, on which sat Sang Sang and Tang Xiaotang. A frightened little white wolf was hiding under the chair, and a big black horse was panting behind the chair. No one knew when the silly horse finally got rid of the big white goose and hurried to find the second mistress in his heart. Sang Sang sat on the chair and looked at some flowers in her hands. She was bored and spaced out. Tang Xiaotang kicked the stone in front of the chair and spaced out. Suddenly she turned to Sang Sang and said with a smile, Hello, I am Tang Xiaotang. Sang Sang said, Hello, I just heard you say that. Tang Xiaotang continued, I am from the wilderness, and I am going to study in the academy. Sang Sang was stunned and said softly, I am Sang Sang, Ning Ke's handmaiden, and I am from, in the past, she did not know where her home was, whether it was Min Mountain, the city of Wei, or the Hebei County where Ning Ke found her. But now she suddenly remembered that she was born in Chang'an, so she did not know why she was happy. I am from Chang'an, and I am not going to study in the academy. I heard that the Westhill Divine Palace wants me to study there, but I don't want to go either. So I don't know what they want me to do here today. If it were other female cultivators who heard Sang Sang say that the Westhill Divine Palace wanted her to study there, their first reaction would be disbelief and then ridicule. However, Tang Xiaotang chose to believe it without hesitation and said, You did the right thing. The Westhill Divine Palace is not interesting. Then she stretched out her hand and said brightly, Since we know each other, we are friends. Sang Sang was not used to this enthusiasm, but after thinking for a while, she nodded seriously. Suddenly, there was a fierce argument in the hut without walls. Sang Sang was still looking down at the flowers in her hands. Tang Xiaotang looked over there and murmured, Is the academy really not accepting people from the Enlightenment doctrine? The headmaster returned to the academy. Everyone in the back of the mountain was there. Even the scholar was hugging a book and leaning against the pillar to read. There were two extremely fierce debates in the hut today. The first was Chen Pipi's indignant objection to Tang Xiaotang entering the academy, but he was ruthlessly suppressed by second brother. The second was Ning Ke's deep self-reflection on his excessive drinking last night, but he was ruthlessly suppressed by second brother when he tried to defend himself. However, what really shocked the disciples in the back of the mountain was what happened next. The headmaster looked at Ning Ke and said slowly, You are a student that I have never seen before. But since you could pass all the tests I set and reach the peak, no matter what Jun Mo and Pippi did in the process, You have succeeded. So I will admit that you are my student. Somehow, Ning Ke always felt that something terrible was going to happen. Although the trip to the wilderness did not make the academy lose too much face, especially the fight between the two kids from the judicial department of the Divine Hall, you were still impulsive and did not behave properly. In my opinion, there are still some problems with your temperament, so the ceremony will be held later. In the following period of time, you should reflect on yourself. This is your punishment. Ning Ke asked, Teacher, how should I reflect? The headmaster said indifferently, I will punish you to seclude yourself in the cliff. You can come out when you have thought it through. Hearing that Ning Ke would be punished to seclude himself in the cliff, the disciples in the back of the mountain looked at the headmaster in shock. They could not understand why the headmaster would make such a decision. Because they knew very well what the back cliff meant to the academy. They also knew how difficult it was to come out after entering the back cliff. Why was the headmaster so harsh or even cruel to youngest brother? In chapter 176, Ning Ke shamelessly bumped into the winter grass. When I was writing, I thought of Yi Tianxing running wildly in the rape flower field in the Vermilion Bird story. I am recalling my previous feelings and explaining the regret I mentioned at the end of the last chapter. I regret that I had to fulfill the 180,000 words promise. Thinking of it, I trembled all over. It was not because I saw a beauty, not because I was cold, not because I was excited, but because I was afraid. Today is the 3rd chapter. Because my leader is sick, I haven't washed the dishes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 375. The academy had the back mountain, and there was a cliff behind the mountain. Except for Ning Ke, everyone in the back mountain had been to the cliff. They had been shocked by the peerless scenery of the cliff, and it was because they were too shocked that they rarely went there. To them, the cliff was not a dangerous place, but they knew very well that going there to see the sea of clouds and waterfalls and seclusion in the cliff were two different things. Because the last person who was imprisoned in the back cliff of the academy was the youngest uncle who had once shocked the world. Now, except for the people in the back mountain, no one was willing or dared to mention him. They knew the story of the youngest uncle's seclusion in the cliff of the back mountain, and they knew how much perseverance and talent it took to break out of there. So when they heard that Ning Ke was going to the back cliff to meditate in seclusion, everyone showed a look of disbelief on their faces. It was difficult for them to accept that their youngest brother would face such a trial. There was dead silence in the hut. The disciples in the back mountain had mixed emotions. They obviously did not agree with the headmaster's punishment of Ning Ke, but no one dared to speak, because the headmaster in the chair slowly closed his eyes. Except for his tall figure, there was nothing special about the headmaster. Except that he once went to the West Hill to cut off peach blossoms, he did not have many legendary deeds in the world. He even left more marks in the world than his younger brother, Kuhaoran. However, people in the cultivation world believe that he was the greatest legend in the past 1,000 years. For the people in the hut, the headmaster was their respected and feared teacher. So they could not understand or agree with the headmaster's punishment of their youngest brother, but they did not know what to do. At this moment, Chin Pippi nervously rubbed his hands and walked to Ning Ke's side. He bowed to the headmaster in the chair and said in a trembling voice, Teacher, isn't it a little too heavy? Before Ning Ke entered the academy, Chin Pippi was the youngest student on the 2nd floor of the academy. He was the most favored by the headmaster other than the eldest brother. According to past habits, only he could stand up and say a few words at this time. Since last spring, although Ning Ke had gone to the wilderness and did not stay in the back mountain for a long time, all the senior brothers and senior sisters in the back mountain liked this new younger brother very much. Now that Chin Pippi had plucked up the courage to speak, the rest of the senior brothers also came forward to plead for Ning Quebec's 7th sister Mu Yu walked to the back of the headmaster of the academy and massaged his back. Beigong Weiyang and Shiman Buhua sighed sadly and talked about the steep cliff at the back of the mountain. Fifth brother and eighth brother tried to interrupt the conversation. Everyone tried all kinds of ways to make the headmaster happy, hoping that the headmaster would take back his decision of punishment. The 11th brother, Wang Qi, did not go forward to circle around the master. He looked at the master and thought for a long time. Then he asked very seriously, if there is no thing, then there is no heart. If there is no skin, then there is no hair. If there is no flower, then there is no color. If there is no sin, then there is no punishment. I don't know what sin master has committed by punishing the youngest brother so heavily. Wang Qi had always been a man of few words and only liked to talk with flowers. At this time, he actually expressed his opinion on the headmaster's punishment. It could be imagined that everyone was very worried about the outcome of Ning Ke being imprisoned in the back cliff. The second brother had always attached great importance to etiquette and was very particular about respecting the master. However, at this time, he glanced at the 11th brother, Wang Qi, and did not scold him. Instead, he looked at the headmaster of the academy and reported slowly, "Master, I have thought about the rules of the academy. Younger brother has not committed any sin that is worthy of such a heavy punishment." At the corner of the hut, the third sister, Yu Lian, stopped writing the hairpin-style small regular script. She glanced at the headmaster and then at Ning Ke thoughtfully. The people in the back mountain of the academy kept persuading the headmaster of the academy, but the headmaster of the academy still sat quietly in the chair with his eyes closed. The eldest brother looked at the headmaster quietly. Suddenly, he took 2 steps forward and bowed deeply. At this step, the hut suddenly became quiet again. The disciples in the back mountain were silent and then returned to their respective positions. They looked at the eldest brother nervously and hopefully. The headmaster of the academy slowly opened his eyes and looked at him in surprise. He said, "You also have something to say?" The eldest brother straightened up and said seriously, "Of course, there is a deeper meaning behind the teacher's action. I can vaguely guess some of it. However, youngest brother hasn't been in the sect for long. Although he had a fortuitous encounter in the wilderness and his cultivation realm improved rapidly, how can he be compared with youngest uncle?" The second brother frowned slightly and also thought of the story. He shook his head and said, "Master, what the eldest brother said makes sense. What if younger brother still can't figure it out after 10 years? What should we do then?" The headmaster of the academy looked at the 2 disciples who had been with him since they were young and the begging children around the hut. He raised his long eyebrows slightly and said, "If he can't figure it out, he should never come out. I have never believed in lucky chance. However, since he has accepted the lucky chance, he needs to solve it himself." The headmaster of the academy's eyes were very calm. He only slowly glanced at the crowd, but everyone felt that the headmaster's gaze had always been on them. There was an indisputable majesty in his calmness. The crowd subconsciously lowered their heads and dared not to plead for Ning Quebec. The hut was as quiet as a dead pond. Ning Ke had heard Shin Pippi mention the back cliff of the academy's back mountain once. At that time, he did not care much about it. Even when he heard that the headmaster of the academy wanted to punish him by isolating him in the back cliff, he was not too shocked. He thought that since he was in isolation, there would be a day when he would come out. Perhaps the headmaster of the academy wanted to take this opportunity to sharpen his mind and give him another lucky chance. However, looking at the senior brothers and sisters' reactions, and even the eldest brother and the second brother's solemn expressions, he realized that being imprisoned in the back cliff was a terrible punishment. Especially when he heard the second brother say that the headmaster of the academy would never come out after 10 years, he suddenly felt a chill. It was said that everything in the human world was cultivation. However, cultivation in the human world and cultivation in a lonely and cold cell were 2 different things. No matter how great the lucky chance was, he could not accept being imprisoned in the back mountain's cliff for 10 years or even for a lifetime, even if he had to die. Ning Ke lowered his head and thought of the miserable future of being imprisoned for a lifetime. His body was as cold as falling into an ice cellar. He could not figure out what he had done to deserve such a punishment. However, when he raised his head, there was no anger or unwillingness on his face. Because he knew that those emotions were useless in front of the headmaster of the academy. He just asked seriously, "Teacher, what do I need to do to understand?" The headmaster of the academy said, "If you understand, then you understand." If he thought it through, then he would understand. No matter how he thought about it, this sentence sounded like nonsense. Ning Ke thought of the scene when he could not understand his snow mountain and ocean of qi. He thought of the scene when he was meditating on the talisman and vaguely understood some things. After a moment of silence, he said, "Then how can I prove that I have understood?" The headmaster of the academy said, "You will understand when you understand." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "I think there must be a standard." The headmaster of the academy looked at his little disciple in front of him and saw the hidden determination on his calm face. His eyes suddenly brightened like the dew on a pine branch, reflecting the morning light. "Of course there is a standard." "Who will determine the standard?" "Teacher, you." "The standard is already there." "Teacher, but I can't stay in the back cliff for a long time. His Majesty still wants to see me. I still have to learn how to manage the array in Chang'an. In a few days, it will be my teacher Yen Sei's 100-day sacrifice. I have to kowtow there. How about I stay in seclusion for 8 days every 10 days? Hearing Ning Ke's words, the headmaster of the academy's eyes became brighter and brighter. The dew gradually turned into a pool of water. In the pool of water, there was a clear but unknown smile. The smile was so strong that it seemed to overflow. Suddenly, the smile in the headmaster's eyes disappeared. He looked at Ning Ke and said slowly, "Last night on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes, did you say that you were an indifferent person?" "I was originally an indifferent person in Crouching Dragon Mound." Ning Ke murmured. The headmaster of the academy said, "I don't know where Crouching Dragon Mound is, but I know what indifferent means." Ning Ke understood this sentence and looked up at the white grass hanging from the eaves of the hut. He knew that a person like the headmaster of the academy would definitely not be angry with his student because of the dispute on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes. Then why did he lock him in the back mountain? Was it because he joined the devil? Youngest uncle was punished by heaven and died. His reputation and body were annihilated in the wilderness and were never heard of again. Could it be that the headmaster of the academy wanted to lock him, the disciple who had inherited youngest uncle's great spirit, in the back mountain because of that old matter? Was it for the academy's righteous reputation or for other reasons? His thoughts were in a mess, and the things that Ning Ke had just figured out suddenly became blurry again. The great spirit in his chest and abdomen moved at will, like a knife going straight up, piercing his throat until it was dry. He said in a hoarse voice, "Teacher, turns out to be an unreasonable person." Hearing this, the people in the back mountain of the academy in the hut were shocked. Second brother looked unhappy and eldest brother sighed slowly. Although the headmaster of the academy usually got along well with the students and teachers, a teacher was a teacher. Under such a serious situation, who dared to question or even criticize him like Ning Ke? The headmaster of the academy was not angry. He said, "Didn't you say that your teacher was the most unreasonable person in the building of pines and cranes?" Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "Teacher, please allow me to talk to my handmaiden before going to the back cliff." The headmaster of the academy said, "No need. You still have to eat on the back cliff. I asked you to bring your handmaiden here to serve you. You can bring her to the back cliff later." Ning Ke finally understood why the headmaster of the academy asked him to bring Sang Sang to see him. It turned out that the headmaster of the academy had already prepared to lock him in the back mountain. He suddenly thought of something. With Sang Sang's temperament, she would definitely not leave the back cliff alone if he was imprisoned there. In fact, both of them would be imprisoned together. If he was imprisoned at the back cliff for the rest of his life, would Sang Sang also be imprisoned there? Thinking of this, the sharp and straightforward great spirit rushed into his chest like a knife. He could no longer control his emotions. He angrily looked at the headmaster of the academy in the chair and clenched his fists. However, He did nothing but looked at the headmaster of the academy quietly. He took a deep breath and forced himself to swallow it. Then he said calmly, "Yes, teacher." The headmaster of the academy looked at the youngest disciple in front of him, who was also his last disciple. He quietly looked at him for a long time. He looked at him thinking hard, looking at him dejectedly accepting his fate, looking at him unable to suppress his anger, looking at him gradually becoming bolder, looking at him calming down, looking at him calming down, looking at him returning to normal. Ha! 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 The headmaster of the academy suddenly raised his head and laughed. Then he stood up from the chair and brushed his black robe. Without saying anything to the disciples, he walked out of the hut desolately. Walking out of the hut, the old man looked at the golden orchid tree that the two of them had planted many years ago. Looking at the dense green leaves on the tree, the old man sighed with both joy and regret. There are indeed no two leaves in the world that are exactly the same. Then how can there be two people that are exactly the same? Note, in the world of Nightfall, there is a tree called the golden orchid tree. Also, this is the first chapter. If you don't eat, try to finish the second chapter by 8:45. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 376. Looking at the back of the headmaster walking towards the waterfall, eldest brother and second brother vaguely understood something. However, they still thought that the headmaster's punishment of imprisoning youngest brother on the cliff at the back of the mountain was too harsh. Although it was said that one could be reborn in a dead end, not everyone could be like youngest uncle. Yu Lian tidied up the ink and paper on the table and walked out of the hut. She stopped when she passed by Ning Ke and said softly, "Since the teacher's decision can't be changed, bring your handmaiden and follow the teacher. Don't let the teacher wait for too long." Ning Ke was also looking at the figure of the headmaster in the distance. He prayed that the headmaster would forget about him after a few laughs so that he could avoid this calamity. However, after listening to third sister's words, he realized that it was just wishful thinking. He sighed with a bitter smile and followed her out of the hut to the bamboo chair. Senior sister Yu Lian said to Tang Xiaotang, "Come with me. I'll arrange a place for you." Tang Xiaotang nodded happily and waved goodbye to Sang Sang. She said, "It seems that I will stay in the academy in the future. Come and play with me then." Sang Sang nodded. Tang Xiaotang followed Yu Lian to the cliff plateau happily. She was jumping happily like a restless stone, while Yu Lian was as quiet and tranquil as a delicate tree. The two girls were quite different in age. They were both petite, but their breaths were completely different. However, they seemed to be very harmonious when they were together. Ning Ke withdrew his gaze and looked at Sang Sang in front of him. He said with a smile, "The headmaster of the academy was very happy to see me and decided to teach me some secret cultivation methods of the academy. I guess I will be cultivating in seclusion in the back mountain these days. You go back to the old brush pen shop and I will go back to the city as soon as I finish my business." The headmaster had asked him to bring Sang Sang to the back of the mountain of the academy in case he needed someone to take care of him after he was imprisoned. However, Ning Ke was not willing to let Sang Sang be trapped on the cliff with him. Sang Sang looked at him and said softly, "You were talking too loudly in the room, and young master, you know that my ears are very good, so I heard everything." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "Yes, I was punished by my teacher and imprisoned in the back cliff for seclusion. I don't know when I can come out." Sang Sang looked at him and said worriedly, "What should we do?" Ning Ke looked at her. She shook her head and said, "I definitely want to be with you." After thinking for a while, Ning Ke said, "Let's see how it goes first. If I'm trapped at the back cliff for too long, you can go back to the Grand Secretary's mansion first. I don't think anyone will stop you." Sang Sang said nothing. He looked at the distant mountain path stretching into the dense forest under the waterfall. The headmaster's floating figure was about to disappear. After a moment of silence, he led Sang Sang in that direction. When the cottage disappeared behind them, Sang Sang looked around and pulled his sleeve. She whispered, "Is it because you have joined the diabolism that the academy wants to lock you up?" Ning Ke said, "In the wilderness, eldest brother should have already guessed what happened after I learned the great spirit of youngest uncle, so the headmaster must have already known it. However, I'm not sure if the headmaster's punishment has anything to do with this. He didn't mention it in the hut." There was a crooked old plum tree by the side of the road. The plum tree passed by Sang Sang's dark face, making her look more nervous. She lowered her voice and said, "The headmaster said that you are the son of Yama." Ning Ke said angrily, "Don't mention your cheating headmaster." "I said I'm not." Sang Sang said worriedly, "But the academy wants to lock you up. Is it related to this?" Ning Ke didn't want to admit this inference, but his heart became heavy. With a heavy heart, his footsteps became heavier. Ning Ke didn't know what was waiting for him at the back cliff. He subconsciously held Sang Sang's hand and walked forward in silence, very slowly. On the mountain path ahead, the black robe fluttered in the wind. Sometimes it disappeared into the dense forest, and sometimes it appeared beside the silver waterfall. The headmaster seemed to be walking very fast, but he always stayed in their sight. After bypassing second brother's courtyard and walking for a while, they approached the silver waterfall. The sound of the waterfall was like thunder in the surrounding forest, and the air was filled with tiny pieces of water particles, which formed a cool mist, making it refreshing to breathe. Ning Ke's breathing became a little rapid. He wanted to hold Sang Sang's hand and turn around to leave, but he knew that it was a delusion. Even if they really escaped from the academy, it would mean that all the hard work over these years would be in vain, and he and Sang Sang would return to their gloomy lives. Following the fluttering black robe, the two came to the bottom of the waterfall. There was a quiet pool under the waterfall. There was no water outlet facing the cliff platform, and it seemed that it was not connected to Mirror Lake. The overflowing pool water flowed along the low-lying rocks in front of them on the right. Ning Ke held Sang Sang's hand and stepped on the rocks. They followed the direction of the water flow and walked forward. Together with the gurgling water, they walked into a deep valley. The valley was very narrow, no more than 100 feet high, and the giant rocks above touched each other. In fact, it was more like a naturally formed giant cave. The air in the cave was moist and slightly cold, and the walls were covered with moss. The water from the quiet pool flowed through the rocks at the bottom of the cave, forming a picture like a paddy field. In front of the valley was a clear blue sky, cut into an oval, like a blue porcelain plate, very beautiful. Ning Ke and Sang Sang stepped on the stones in the paddy field, walking toward the blue. As they walked, the valley suddenly narrowed, and the water between the rocks suddenly became turbulent. With a rustling sound, white waves gradually appeared, and the moss on the rocks shook violently. Walking out of the canyon, there was a precipice in front of them. The turbulent water was jumping and rushing towards the edge of the cliff. The blue sky was cut into two halves by the cliff, and the middle line was this water line. Sang Sang held Ning Ke's hand tightly and looked at the scenery in front of her, speechless. The winding path led to a secluded place, and in the end, there was a desperate situation. The mountain wind whistled. Standing by the cliff and the waterfall, they could not hear any sound, as if there was an endless abyss under the cliff. The abyss could not be seen. There was nothing in front of Ning Ke except the sky and the cliff. The cliff extended endlessly to the sky and on both sides, as if it was the Gobi Desert to the north of the West Palace in the grassland, but this Gobi Desert was in the sky. Compared with the boundless cliffs and precipices, the gorge where they were at was just an inconspicuous small gap, and the waterfall was just a thin line. Ning Ke looked at the cliff in the distance and saw that there were more than 10 waterfalls falling down the precipices. They were of different heights and distances, and looked very beautiful. Vast cliffs, blue skies, and over a dozen waterfalls that were as thin as threads combined to form an extremely vast world. Even the most powerful person would feel insignificant in front of these scenes. Ning Ke carefully took a step to the side of the cliff, holding Sang Sang's hand and bending down to look. He saw the bottom of the cliff covered with clouds and mist, and did not know how deep it was. The more than 10 waterfalls on the cliff fell into the clouds like a bunch of pillars, splashing circles of clouds, and then disappeared silently, as if there was a world under the clouds that did not belong to the human world. The cliff behind the back of the mountain of the academy was a beautiful new world. However, the beauty of this place could easily make people feel shocked and helpless. Standing on the edge of the cliff, Ning Ke looked down at the clouds and watched the waterfalls fall into the clouds. He did not have any feeling of floating in the air, because the clouds formed and gathered, and the waterfalls fell into the clouds without the sound of water. Instead, he felt some kind of fear. Thinking of the way he came, he was sure that this should be the west side of the mountain. No wonder he had never seen such a cliff on the official road from Chang and to the academy in the past 2 years. The cliff seemed to be too steep to climb, but in fact, there was a very narrow stone path hidden in it. Ning Ke looked up and saw the figure of the headmaster gliding between the cliffs, sometimes in the east, sometimes in the west. No matter how hard he looked, he could not determine which part of the cliff he was on. Ning Ke held Sang Sang's hand and began to walk up. The two had lived in Min Mountain since childhood, so they had their own ways of climbing cliffs and turned a blind eye to the cliff and the sky under their feet. The higher they went up the cliff, the less green there was. There was no quiet lake, no hut, no laughter, and no ancient pine chessboard. It was a completely different world from the other side of the mountain. This cliff silently, or perhaps indifferently, looked at the sky on the other side for who knew how many tens of thousands of years. At the end of the narrow stone path, there finally appeared a small cliff yard. There was a very simple hut on the edge of the cliff, and there was a cave on the cliff. The headmaster sat on the edge of the cliff, looking into the distance, thinking about something. Ning Ke walked behind the headmaster and looked out of the cliff. His gaze fell on Chang and city beyond the sea of clouds. The sun was setting, and the golden sunlight shone on the black and cyan city wall, reflecting a very solemn and sacred luster. That was the most magnificent city in the world, and it was the most perfect masterpiece of mankind. Ning Ke looked at Chang and city in the twilight, and for a moment, all kinds of feelings welled up in his heart. He could not speak for a long time. After a long time, he softly sighed. Chang and city is really beautiful at this time. The headmaster said, Chang and city has always been beautiful. Ning Ke said, those who built Chang and city must have been great. The headmaster opened the food box beside him, took out a small urn, and filled a cup with wine. He casually said, those who built the city are not great, because there needs to be people to guard the city. Ning Ke was stunned. The headmaster drank up the wine in his cup, picked up a piece of lamb soaked in scallion oil, and ate it. He looked at Chang and city in the distance and laughed happily, as if he could not get tired of looking at it. Chang and city was shrouded in the twilight. The headmaster looked at Chang and city in the twilight. He looked at his own Chang and city. Looking at the back of the headmaster, an indescribable feeling welled up in Ning Ke's heart. The negative feelings and doubts in his heart were all dispelled by the scene in front of him. Looking down from the clouds, looking down from the outside world. What kind of feeling is that? Teacher, are you guarding this city, the Tang Empire, or the whole world? If I were a painter, I would really like to paint the academy, the back of the mountain, and the cliff and waterfall behind the back of the mountain. I think it is really beautiful. This is the second chapter, and the third chapter may be a little later, because I have to go for a meal. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 377. In the twilight, the hole in the cliff looked like the open mouth of a monster. Looking at the entrance of the cave, Ning Ke had this feeling in his mind. He knew that this description was too cliché, but he really couldn't find anything more appropriate than this. The cave seemed to be ready to devour everyone, including light, spring, summer, autumn, winter, time, and all the feelings attached to time. Ning Ke felt extremely cold when he thought about how long he would take to get out of this cave. He might be imprisoned in it for a few months, a few years, or even 10 years. He could not see the girls in Chang'an for 10 years, nor eat the hot and sour noodle slice soup for 10 years. How old would the girls in the House of Red Sleeves be after 10 years? Xiao Chao would probably be married. Would Dewdrop go back to her hometown? In fact, Ning Ke might be imprisoned in the back of the mountain for more than 10 years, such as a lifetime. But he, who stood in front of the cave, did not want to think about that. He was a student of the second floor of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. After seeing the scene in the twilight, all the dark emotions in his heart disappeared. He trusted the mountain behind the academy and the people in it. However, he had lived a miserable life since he was a child. At the thought of handing over his life and freedom to others, he instinctively began to resist and want to escape. Ning Ke looked back at the headmaster who was eating mutton and drinking by the cliff and asked, "Teacher, why did you lock me up? Is it because of joining the devil or because of something else?" He wanted to ask the headmaster if it was because the divine priest of light thought that he was the son of Yama, so the headmaster punished him and isolated him from the world. But he did not ask. He firmly believed that he had nothing to do with the illusory Yama. But many years ago, because of those illusory legends, there had been a bloody storm. He did not want to have anything to do with this matter. The headmaster did not turn back and asked, "What do you mean by imprisonment?" Ning Ke looked at his back and answered after a moment of silence, "Depriving of freedom." The headmaster said, "Freedom is very precious. Compared with freedom, even life is nothing. Only freedom itself is more precious than freedom." Ning Ke did not understand this sentence. The headmaster put the chopsticks back into the lunchbox, picked up a piece of ginger with his fingers and put it into his mouth, chewing slowly. After a while, he stood up and turned around to look at Ning Ke at the entrance of the cave. He said, "Since freedom itself is more precious than freedom, then there is only one reason to deprive you of your freedom. That is, they want you to have greater freedom. This is a very simple matter." Ning Ke vaguely understood more things and said helplessly, "Teacher, since it's such a simple thing, why didn't you tell me in a simple way?" After saying this, he slowly turned around and looked at the cliff cave in front of him. After a long silence, he took a deep breath and walked inside. The last rays of twilight shone on Chang'an City in the distance, as well as on the desolate cliffs here. The golden red was like the purest flame, and the cliff cave was like an entrance to the unknown in the fire. It was very quiet in the cliff cave. There wasn't even a gust of wind. It was slightly cold and the air was very dry. Ning Ke, who had been hunting and killing for years, instinctively closed his eyes when he walked into the darkness from the bright place. When he opened his eyes again, he was used to the brightness of the environment. The light outside the cliff cave shone in. The cave was not as dark as it looked from the outside, and he could clearly see the natural lines between the stones on the cave walls. Ning Ke suddenly came to his senses. Did he just walk in like this? Was it that simple? He turned around and looked out of the cave. He saw Sang Sang holding a protruding rock at the entrance of the cave, looking at him with a worried face. The headmaster at the edge of the cliff had already begun to pack up the lunchbox and was ready to leave. He was very close to the entrance of the cave, and could even see the last scene of the southern city wall of Chang'an City beyond the clouds. However, once he walked into the cliff cave, Ning Ke felt as if he was abandoned by the real human world outside, and a strong sense of loneliness and fear arose in his heart. "Teacher." Ning Ke looked at the headmaster who was about to leave and asked in a trembling voice, "Is it possible that I will never come out? So many people have pleaded for you, and it seems that you are popular. If you really want to stay here for the rest of your life, I believe that they will come to keep you company. You don't have to worry about being too lonely." The headmaster looked at him saying this, and then walked down the mountain with the lunchbox. The loose black robe on him, under the red glow of the setting sun, looked like a burning bird's wings. Looking at the headmaster's back, Ning Ke revealed a bitter smile. If he was really going to be imprisoned in this cliff cave for the rest of his life, what was the point of being popular? No filial son can be found in bed for a long time, and no one knows you for a long time. No matter how good a friend is, who can accompany you to be imprisoned for the rest of your life? If he really stayed in the cliff cave, he would eventually be forgotten by the world. Of course, there would be someone who would always be with him. Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang outside the cave. Although they were not far apart, he felt that she was far away. He looked at her eyes and said, "If I still can't come out in 3 months, you can go down the mountain." Sang Sang wanted to say something. Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Don't force me to use those sissy methods." Legend had it that those extremely powerful divine talisman masters could draw a ground as a prison. Ning Ke had never seen Master Yen Sei use this method, but he had seen the confinement of the Westhill Divine Palace, the deacon of the judicial department in the tent of the desolate man, and the confinement array drawn by youngest uncle with the Howran sword in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. The entrance of the cliff cave seemed to be empty. Occasionally, a gust of wind blew by, and dust slowly floated in and out of the cave. But Ning Ke knew that there must be something there. The headmaster imprisoned him in this cave and told him that he could only go out after he figured it out. If he figured it out, he could understand everything in the world, and if he figured it out, he could walk out of the cave. His seclusion in the cliff cave could be regarded as a punishment, a tempering of his mind, and a test. Every time he encountered a real test, Ning Ke would calm down as fast as he could and dispel all the anxiety when he was sure that there was no other way. He would never be anxious, but would make the best preparation before he tried to face the test. So he sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and began to meditate. The Great Spirit in his body slowly flowed and began to absorb the aura of heaven and earth around him according to a certain rhythm. The sun had set at this time, and Chang'an City was shrouded in shadows. People there had probably seen the night ahead of time, but people on the top of the cliff could still enjoy some remaining sunlight. The light shone on his eyelashes, which were as bright as a layer of honey powder. Ning Ke opened his eyes and made sure that he had adjusted himself to the best state, both mentally and physically. He got up and walked to the entrance of the cave slowly and steadily. The last afterglow shrouded the entrance of the cliff cave, and he walked into the afterglow. Suddenly, Ning Ke felt that the air in front of him, including the afterglow in the sky, was stagnant, as if it was as sticky as water with a lot of honey in it, bringing with it a lot of resistance. Especially when he went out of the cave, the invisible resistance was magnified countless times, and in the end, it was almost like a swamp, making it difficult for him to breathe and take a step forward. Feeling the obstacle at the entrance of the cave, he did not try to forcibly break through, but retreated back into the cave as fast as he could. It was not until he took 3 steps back that he finally got rid of the sticky invisible force. He slightly gasped for a moment, and then his pale face returned to normal. Sang Sang walked out of the hut by the cliff, holding a lit torch in her hand. With the warm red light of the torch, Ning Ke carefully examined the entrance of the cliff cave. He looked very carefully, including the seemingly natural lines on the wall and even the gravel on the ground. However, he did not find any fluctuation of talisman intent, nor did he see any trace of tactical array. The inhibition of the cliff cave was not a talisman or tactical array, but an aura that appeared out of nowhere. This aura was very simple, but it was incomparably powerful. It was like the purest wine, but it was extremely strong. The aura of heaven and earth between the cliffs was called to the entrance of the cave by this aura in a way that he could not understand. With such a large amount of aura of heaven and earth blocking the small cave entrance, it could be imagined how much it was compressed. It was so thick and condensed that it had even exceeded a certain boundary, directly causing some kind of qualitative change, which made the invisible chi of heaven and earth become a substantial obstacle. Sang Sang held the torch and looked into the cave, shouting, "Young master, how is it? Can you do it? It's not that easy to find a way out." Ning Ke shook his head, looking at her holding the torch, and suddenly said, "Step aside." Sang Sang struggled to insert the torch into the ground outside the cave entrance, and returned to the hut by the cliff. Looking at the entrance of the cliff cave, Ning Ke thought that if the inhibition of the cave entrance was some kind of complicated tactical array or a divine talisman, he really could not do anything with his current state. However, the inhibition here was directly condensed by the strong aura of the Qi of heaven and earth, which was more like a substantial barrier. For cultivators, the amount of Qi of heaven and earth condensed by this inhibition was too much, and it could even directly affect their psyche power to control the Qi of heaven and earth. But for Ning Ke, this inhibition seemed to have some kind of loophole, because he did not need to mobilize the Qi of heaven and earth. After inheriting the youngest uncle's great spirit and joining the devil, Ning Ke's body became stronger and stronger. As long as the barrier was tangible, he should be able to use brute force to break through. The more he thought about it, the brighter his eyes became, and he felt that this method seemed feasible. Ning Ke looked at the entrance of the cliff cave, thinking of the shocked faces of his senior brothers and sisters, and the ugly face of the headmaster when he rushed out and took Sang Sang down the mountain. He became more and more excited. The Great Spirit silently flowed, instilling into the smallest part of his body. Staring at the entrance of the cave, Ning Ke slightly bent his knees and gradually lifted his heels. With a snap, his left foot fiercely kicked the hard ground, and a clear footprint appeared on the hard ground. With the huge recoil force, his whole body whistled through the air, and suddenly rushed to the entrance of the cave like an arrow. There was a muffled groan from the entrance of the cliff cave. A figure, like a wild goose shot through the neck by an arrow, flew miserably and fell to the ground miserably. Ning Ke fell heavily on the ground, embarrassed. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and the blood fell like rain on the footprint he had just left. This is the third chapter. The fourth chapter must be written before 2:45. I want to watch the game. I want to watch the game today. Besides, I have to admit that Ronaldo is indeed one of the two best players in the world, although I still prefer Little White. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 378. Under the red light of the torch, the blood stains on the footprints were like ink spots. Looking at that spot, Ning Ke's face turned pale and he found that he had been shaken back to his original place by the inhibition at the entrance of the cave. The shoe on his left foot had been smashed into a cotton-like thing. He tore it off and struggled to sit up. Looking at the entrance of the cave that had been shrouded in darkness, his eyes could not help showing a trace of fear. Previously, when he violently crashed into the entrance of the cave, just at the moment when he was about to hit the inhibition, the thick and sticky Qi of heaven and earth seemed to have sensed something and suddenly became violent. It turned into a terrifying ocean and directly rolled up his consciousness and body. Ning Ke had never been to the kingdom of Song and had never seen the famous Sea of Storms. But he believed that even the real Sea of Storms was not as terrible as the ocean that he had fallen into. The ocean that was condensed by the thick Qi of heaven and earth was shaking violently both on the surface and at the bottom. Thousands of huge whirlpools made it impossible for him to react or struggle, and he directly sank into the depths of the sea. The omnipresent pressure in the depths of the primordial Qi ocean turned into countless extremely thin needles, piercing his clothes and skin, and then directly into his body. The seemingly strong Great Spirit in Ning Ke's body was like a candle in this violent ocean. It was instantly extinguished and scattered by those thin needles. The pain brought by those countless thin needles directly destroyed the protection of his sense of perception by his psyche power, which made him extremely painful. In the end, the violent ocean turned up a wave and easily knocked him back to the shore. He could feel that the wave was at most 1/10,000th of the power of the ocean, but it seemed to be more powerful than the fist of Xiaoho he had met on the shore of the Hulun Sea in the wilderness. Hearing the noise, Sang Sang hurriedly ran out of the hut and saw Ning Ke falling on the ground by the light of the torch. She was shocked and without thinking, she ran into the cliff cave. Ning Ke forcibly swallowed the blood that rushed to his throat and shouted, "Don't come in." Since childhood, they had lived a difficult life. In order to survive, they had long cultivated a tacit understanding between them. No matter what situation they encountered, Sang Sang would always unconditionally carry out Ning Kei's advice. This had become a kind of instinct. Therefore, after hearing this shout, Sang Sang did not come in no matter how worried she was. She leaned against the stone wall and looked at the pale Ning Quebec. She asked in a trembling voice, "How is it?" Ning Kei put his left foot on his right knee, closed his eyes and began to meditate. The Great Spirit slowly circulated in his body. After confirming that there were no major problems with the Sea of Consciousness, Ocean of Snow, Ocean of Qi, and the cyclone in his lower abdomen, especially after confirming that the violent ocean did not destroy the Great Spirit in his body, he was slightly relieved and said in a low voice, "It's okay. I won't die." He had been injured too many times in his life, and Sang Sang had seen him get injured too many times. As long as he didn't die, the two of them wouldn't take it too seriously. As long as he didn't die, he would be fine. After the severely shaken sense of perception gradually calmed down, Ning Kei stood up and slowly walked to the entrance of the cliff cave. He stretched out his hand and pressed it gently in the air. His palms suddenly felt sluggish. It did not feel like water, but more like a bag filled with water, soft but unbreakable. Why didn't I sense the existence of the restriction when I walked in? He looked at the entrance of the cliff cave and thought about the magic of the restriction. No wonder his senior brothers and senior sisters were so shocked during the day. If he wanted to break out of the restriction, he was afraid that it would take a long time. After confirming that it would be a long process, he gradually calmed down and prepared for a long battle. After a moment of silence, he looked at Sang Sang and said with a smile, "Anyway, we have to eat first. Otherwise, we will starve to death before we die of old age. Let's go and see if there is anything to eat in the hut." He wanted to make Sang Sang feel more relaxed with this joke. But at this time, his face was pale, his expression was gloomy, his smile was forced, and there was blood on his chest. How could Sang Sang feel relaxed? "There is rice, vegetables, and meat in the hut. I don't know when it was prepared. I have steamed the rice before, but the water in the tank can only last for 10 days at most. I don't know where to fetch water." Sang Sang reported the current situation to him, and then walked back to the hut to prepare dinner. The cliff was silent, the stars were shining in the night sky, and the clouds were faintly visible under the cliff. It seemed that this place was no longer in the human world, and it was lonely and desolate. Ning Kei leaned against the stone wall at the entrance of the cave and looked at the night view in front of the cliff. He was a little depressed. Although he knew that the headmaster must have a reason to imprison him here, he still felt a little resentful and unwilling. He thought that he had done nothing wrong. Why was he imprisoned in this damn place like the Repent Cliff? He heard the sound of water on the right front. He looked over and saw Sang Sang squatting on the edge of the cliff, washing vegetables. The little girl probably had no concept of the cliff scenery or the concept of human insignificance. After washing vegetables, she naturally poured the water mixed with sand in the basin directly down the cliff. Perhaps only Sang Sang could ignore such a steep and terrifying precipice and focus on washing vegetables on the edge of the cliff. He wondered if the white clouds at the bottom of the cliff would feel the same when they were drenched by a basin of vegetable washing water as when they were drenched by a clear waterfall. Ning Kei quietly looked at Sang Sang's figure and thought that he was lucky that he would not hear any *T mountain songs, and he did not need to worry that she would splash him like the vegetable washing water. The food was ready. Although the ingredients were simple, the fragrance was still carried into the cliff cave by the mountain wind. Ning Kei used a stone to draw a deep line at the entrance of the cliff cave. While Sang Sang was cooking, he slowly felt it with his palm many times and finally determined the scope of triggering the inhibition. Sang Sang put a large bowl of hot food on the ground outside the cave. Then she took a piece of firewood and carefully pushed the bowl over the line according to Ning Kei's guidance. This inhibition really doesn't care about dead things. Otherwise, I would starve to death. Ning Kei held up the bowl of rice with vegetables and bacon and said happily. The two of them held the hot food and sat on the ground facing each other for dinner, just like they usually did in the old brush pen shop. The only difference was that they were separated by a table, but now they were separated by a line. The line was very short, but it divided the two worlds of the cave and the cliff plateau. Ning Ke was inside and Sang Sang was outside. Fortunately, they were together after all. The cliff faced the west and the terrain was extremely high. Without the cover of the tactical array of the academy and surrounded by green trees, the mountain wind was extremely strong. Especially at night, the cold wind whistled back and forth and the cliff plateau suddenly became cold. The food in Ning Ke's bowl was still warm, but the bowl in Sang Sang's hand had already become cold. She subconsciously shrank and wanted to lean to Ning Ke, but did not dare to cross the line. Looking at the little girl's shivering and cold appearance, Ning Ke thought of the fairy tale again. His mood and eyes became cold along with the temperature of the cliff plateau. He thought that Sang Sang had been suffering from coldness since she was a child and could not stand such torture. Thinking of this, his hatred for the headmaster of the academy suddenly came back and he cursed in a low voice. Just when he was about to find a way to trick Sang Sang to go down the mountain, he suddenly heard footsteps on the stone path below the cliff plateau. Although he had been imprisoned for less than half a day, Ning Ke unexpectedly became happy when he heard the footsteps. He shouted, "Which brother is so kind to come to see me?" Suddenly, he understood how the monkey felt when he was trapped under the mountain. In the night, eldest brother clasped his hands behind his back and second brother carried a load and walked up the cliff plateau. Eldest brother was very relaxed, but second brother's load was very heavy, as if he were carrying two small mountains. When he took out the things from the load, he found that it was all-inclusive, including water, rice, vegetables, firewood, meat, wine, books, chess, zither, and even 2 old hens. Sang Sang carried the 2 old hens back to the hut happily, thinking that she could make chicken soup for her young master. He just vomited so much blood and really needed nourishment. Ning Ke looked at the clucking old hens in her hands and was shocked. He sighed and said, "Senior brother, you are really generous. I don't know how you carried such a steep mountain. Why do you carry so many things? It seems that you really want me to live in this cave for several years?" Although second brother was the most powerful person in the world, he was not a professional porter after all. It was a bit hard for him to carry the load all the way. He did not answer Ning Ke's sigh, but took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and carefully wiped the sweat on his neck. Then he straightened the crown on his head and looked at Ning Ke seriously. He said, "Younger brother, you have to wake up. This is definitely not a matter of 10 days or half a month." Ning Ke thought that second brother was really not a qualified visitation, and he did not even know how to say auspicious words. A bonfire was lit on the cliff plateau. Sang Sang was dozing off in a deerskin coat. This coat was sent by senior sister Yu Lian and was just the right size. The fire shone on eldest brother's old coat, as if it was a broken lantern, and second brother's high crown, as if it was a lonely peak with a single tree growing on it. Ning Ke sat in the cave and could not help laughing at this scene. He pointed at second brother's high crown and said, "It really looks like a piece of firewood." Second brother asked, "What's so funny?" "Why is it funny?" "I won't tell you." Ning Ke said with a smile, "Second brother, in fact, everyone thinks the high crown on your head is very funny. But no one told you because they were afraid that you would be angry." Second brother frowned slightly and said unhappily, "Don't talk nonsense. If you are afraid that I will be angry, why do you dare to tell me now?" Ning Ke pointed at the line in front of him and laughed. He said, "Because I can't get out of the cave, and you can't get in either. I thought for a long time and finally came up with this benefit. How can I not use it?" Eldest brother looked at the two and smiled without saying anything. He thought that Jun Mo would probably not continue to be so boring after meeting such a person like youngest brother. The bonfire crackled. Second brother brewed tea and poured 4 cups. The first cup was sent to eldest brother respectfully, and the second cup was placed in front of Sang Sang. Then he flicked his index finger and the third cup of tea was thrown into the cave. The black teacup fell in front of Ning Ke and stopped after spinning 3 times. Not a single drop of tea spilled out. Second brother attached great importance to etiquette and rules, so he was particular about the order of serving tea. He served the elder or the virtuous first, and then the young. As for the third cup, he gave it to Ning Ke because he was in prison. Ning Ke thanked him and raised the cup to his nose to sniff it. He did not drink it and suddenly asked in a low voice, "If I really can't get out, then I really can't get out?" Sang Sang is washing vegetables in the precipice. If you want to talk about whether Jiang Yi has any aesthetic pursuit, if you don't think this word is too pretentious, this picture is my favorite. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 379. There were 2, "I really can't get out," in this sentence. The former referred to his ability, and the latter referred to reality. Ning Ke was thinking and worrying at this moment. The headmaster of the academy had sent him to the back cliff for closed-door training, which made him depressed and even a little desperate. However, he had always thought that the academy would let him out if he was really at his wit's end. He could not just watch his hair turn white overnight and die in this cave of old age. However, in less than a day, he was meditating in the Cloud Cliff Cave. He increasingly felt that his judgment was not trustworthy. Perhaps this cliff cave was really an endless abyss. Listening to his question, the 2 beside the bonfire fell into silence. After a long time, second brother shook his head and eldest brother let out a slight sigh. The mountain wind whistled, and the flamboyant firewood on the cliff plateau gradually weakened. Ning Ke held the hot tea and looked at the flame. He suddenly felt a little cold and regretted following the headmaster of the academy to the back cliff instead of running away with Sang Sang. The cold and the fear of being imprisoned for life finally made the anger that he had accumulated for half a day burst out. He shouted, "It's the first day I see my student, and he locks him up in the cave and prepares to lock him up for life. What kind of logic is this? I didn't do anything wrong, nor did I violate the academy's rules. Why did he do this? Who does he think he is? The emperor or the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City? Didn't they say that the law of the Tang Empire is the most important? He set up a private prison to imprison innocent people. Does that count as violating the law of the Tang Empire? I'm going to sue him. I'm going to go out and sue him." The 2 senior brothers beside the bonfire knew that he was just venting, so they ignored him. Ning Ke gradually calmed down and laughed at himself. He thought that the headmaster of the academy was not the emperor, but he was more honorable than the emperor. His words were more effective than the law of the Tang Empire. The bonfire shone around the entrance of the cliff cave. Eldest brother looked at the blood stains on the front of Meng Qi's robe and knew that Meng Qi had tried to escape as soon as he entered the cliff cave, just as everyone had expected. He advised, "It's not easy to do isolated meditation in the cliff cave. It took youngest uncle 3 years to figure it out. You need to be patient." During the day in the hut on the other side of the mountain, Ning Ke already knew that youngest uncle had been imprisoned in the cliff cave. But now he knew that even youngest uncle, who was once the most powerful person in the world, had to spend a whole 3 years to escape. His body could not help but become colder. No matter how confident he was, he did not dare to hope that he could be compared to little uncle. Little uncle had used 3 years back then, so how long would it take for him to escape? 10 years or a lifetime? He lowered his head and said, "What if we can't get out? It's meaningless for anyone to imprison me in the cliff cave for a lifetime. It's the most meaningless thing to realize that it's meaningless when I'm old." Youngest uncle once said that fate itself is a very cruel guy. Before making sure that you can take on the mission, it will do everything it can to break every bone in you, strip every bit of your flesh and blood, and let you suffer the most extreme pain in the world. Only in this way can your willpower and mind be strong enough to be chosen by fate. Second brother looked at him and said, only a real desperate situation can inspire true courage. So this cliff cave must be a place of death for you. Only in this way can you understand that thing and really deceive heaven and earth. When youngest brother and Long Qin climbed the mountain, I saw your mind and will. I know that you have potential and it's possible. So even if this thing is meaningless to the world, it is meaningful to you. Ning Ke raised his head and looked at his senior brother by the bonfire. He thought of the words, deceive heaven and earth, and then thought of how youngest uncle was also imprisoned in the cliff cave for 3 years. Finally, he confirmed his guess. The reason why the headmaster of academy asked him to seclude himself was indeed related to joining the devil. But why did youngest uncle practice Haoran sword and join the devil? Why did the headmaster of academy lock him in the cave? Ning Ke suddenly wanted to know what happened at that time because he seemed to be on the same path as youngest uncle. So he needed to learn and think about it. Eldest brother looked at Sang Sang who was sleeping by the bonfire. After a moment of hesitation, he smiled and said slowly, I talk too slowly. Let Jun Mo tell you. Second brother said, we have all been to the precipice, but we have never entered this cliff cave. In all the years of the academy, only youngest uncle was imprisoned here for 3 years. He looked at Ning Ke in the cave and said, youngest brother, you have seen the first exploration of Haoran's sword in the old library. Later, I taught you the Great Spirit by the Mirror Lake. Now you have inherited youngest uncle's breath in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and learned the Great Spirit. Naturally, you understand that Haoran's sword and Great Spirit are 2 different things. At this point it was meaningless for Ning Ke to hide the fact that he joined the devil, especially in front of his 2 senior brothers. After a moment of silence, he said, the Great Spirit absorbs the aura of heaven and earth into the body. According to the doctrine of Haotian Taoism, learning the Great Spirit is equal to joining the devil. Obviously, the 2 people by the bonfire had known about this for a long time. They did not show any surprise on their faces. Second brother recalled the past and praised, Haoran's sword is a swordsmanship created by the predecessors of the academy. When it is cultivated to the highest level, the flying sword can pierce through the clouds in the 9th heaven. It is not weaker than Lu Bai's day swordsmanship. Youngest uncle was so talented that he easily cultivated the Haoran sword to such an extreme state. However, he was not complacent at all. He also comprehended the Great Spirit with the Haoran sword style. Youngest uncle was only 16 years old at that time. Ning Ke had long been used to the geniuses in the back of the mountain of the academy. Moreover, youngest uncle was second brother's idol. He had also felt the supreme power of the sword style left by youngest uncle in the wilderness. Therefore, he was not too shocked when he heard that youngest uncle was in the same state as Lu Bai, the strongest man in the world, at the age of 16. However, he still could not help but feel a little dizzy when he thought that the Great Spirit was created by youngest uncle. Now you and I both know that youngest uncle's Great Spirit is essentially in conflict with the philosophy of Haotian Taoism. In other words, it is the cultivation method of the Devil's Doctrine. Therefore, when the headmaster found out about this, he directly locked youngest uncle in this cliff cave. It is said that the headmaster also said the same words to youngest uncle at that time. Ning Ke asked, which words? You can come out when you've figured it out. Ning Ke was speechless. Second brother continued, it took youngest uncle a whole 3 years to understand some things. He walked out of the cliff cave, rode a little black donkey out of the academy and entered Chang'an City. From then on, he entered the human realm. After that, he killed all the powerhouses in the world with a cyan steel sword in his hand. He even went to the wilderness to destroy the Devil's Doctrine. In these countless battles, youngest uncle's Haoran sword was unparalleled, but Haotian Taoism and the Buddhism sect did not suspect anything. He looked at Ning Ke and said, because youngest uncle understood some things in the cliff cave. Ning Ke also understood some things. After a moment of silence, second brother continued, after youngest uncle destroyed the Devil's Doctrine with his sword, he was disheartened by something and rode back to the academy on the little black donkey. He pondered for a night in the sword forest at the front of the mountain, and then went to the back of the mountain to talk with the headmaster for 3 days. Then he came to the cliff and built this hut, which is the one in front of you. After youngest uncle destroyed the devil's doctrine, he was recognized as the strongest person in the world. Many unworldly sublime beings wanted to challenge him. At that time, there were only the headmaster, youngest uncle, me and the scholar in the back of the mountain of the academy. Without the big tactical array in the cloud abyss, anyone could challenge him. It was more troublesome than what you encountered in Chang'an City a few days ago. Eldest brother thought of the sword chi and Buddha's light between the precipices at the back of the cliff and smiled slightly. Youngest uncle did not feel bored. He meditated and pondered in the hut by the cliff. When he was depressed, a real powerhouse would come to him to test his sword, so he killed him with a sword. Now that I think about it, Jishou Abbey and Xiankong Temple have been silent these years. I'm afraid that too many people died in youngest uncle's hands. Second brother looked back at the precipice not far away and thought of the battles that had taken place here in the past. He thought of the experts at the peak of the 5 realms from the unknown place who had fallen under youngest uncle's sword one after another. They suffered heavy casualties and fell off the cliff, and no one remembered their names. He felt proud and regretful. Back then, those people who came to these cliffs and precipices knew that the youngest uncle was invincible, but they still came one after another. They were all cultivators who were truly worthy of respect. That kind of pride that cultivators should have was innately not something that the mediocre and fearful of death in the cultivation world today could compare to. Second brother was also very proud. He had always wanted to follow in youngest uncle's footsteps. He also wanted to recreate the scene where people on the cliff burned their lives into fireworks for dignity and pride. It was a pity that those people were all dead. How many people in the world were worthy of respect and were worthy of fighting? Those unworldly sublime beings either died or escaped with injuries. No one dared to challenge the academy again. The cliff returned to peace. Then one day, youngest uncle suddenly left the hut and never came back. Second brother finished telling the story of that year. Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He heard from Yi Hongyu in the wilderness that youngest uncle was finally killed by heaven's punishment. It was probably because of this that the headmaster of the academy went to West Hill to cut down a mountain of peach blossoms. Haotian Taoism did not want to mention this again. The reputation of the world's most powerful person gradually disappeared. Why did youngest uncle receive heaven's punishment? Because the Great Spirit did not tolerate Haotian, and he was already the world's most powerful person, so he provoked Haotian's anger? Youngest uncle had pondered for many years in the thatched cottage in the cliff cave and finally embarked on the path of destruction. How could he understand this matter? The headmaster imprisoned you in the cliff cave, which is equivalent to treating you as youngest uncle in the past. There is a lot of hidden expectations. If you can't even get through this first obstacle, how can you go on in the future? Eldest brother looked at him and said with a smile, "Youngest brother, your state is much lower than that of youngest uncle in the past. Naturally, there will not be a problem immediately. However, it does not prevent you from going out with a black umbrella in advance. Because your state is still low, it is easier to solve that problem than youngest uncle in the past. So don't always think that you are not as good as youngest uncle. You still have hope." Ning Ke looked at the night sky outside the cliff cave. Ever since he returned to Chang'an from the wilderness, he had been thinking about that problem. How could he prevent the essence of the Great Spirit from being discovered by others? In the battle with Monk Guanhai, he had already made some attempts. However, those methods were superficial and could not fundamentally solve the problem. If he wanted to solve the problem fundamentally, he had to learn to tell a big lie to deceive everyone in the world, even the world. This is the first chapter. I have written some parts of the second chapter. It should be finished before 8:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 380. Back then, youngest uncle had secluded himself in the cliff cave and the hut twice. For the first time, he perfectly solved the problem of traveling in the world with the Great Spirit in 3 years. However, when he became the most powerful person in the world and no longer needed to deceive the world, he had to face a more troublesome situation. So he secluded himself again and thought hard. After a long time, he finally found that he could not deceive himself, so he left the academy and went to the sky. Then he disappeared without a trace. Ning Ke looked at the night sky outside the cliff plateau and the stars on the dark curtain. For the first time, he tried to look behind the stars and touch the deep curtain. In the world, no one dared to disrespect the academy except for Haotian Taoism. The academy was so powerful that it was arrogant and arrogant. Youngest uncle was still a legend in the back of the mountain. Since the headmaster could take in Tang Xiaotang, a girl from the Devil's Doctrine, it meant that the academy did not discriminate against the Devil's Doctrine. So why did the headmaster imprison youngest uncle and him today? He looked at the night sky and murmured in his heart, "Is he trying to deceive your eyes? But you are the divine light, how can you have eyes?" Ning Ke's mind was a bit confused. He suddenly felt a little scared and understood that he was too far away from the real origin of the world. He was not qualified to think about these things. Once he thought about it, the stars in the night sky seemed to laugh. He had to solve the problem in front of him. The problem of how to leave this cliff cave. Youngest uncle had solved this problem perfectly in the past. Now it was his turn. In Chang and at night, those who were qualified or needed to know received the message from the academy. They knew 2 things. The first was that the headmaster had finally ended his 2-year journey and returned to the academy. The second was that Ning Ke, Mr. 13 on the 2nd floor of the academy, was ordered by the headmaster to cultivate in seclusion. Although Xing Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, was a first-class official, he was not qualified to receive the message from the academy. However, he had recently found his long-lost daughter. Therefore, the Grand Secretary's mansion was the first place to know about these 2 things besides the imperial city. Cultivate in seclusion? How long will it take? Xing Jing frowned and asked. Eunuch Lin shook his head and said hesitantly, 1 or 2 months. Who can say for sure? The concept of those eccentric people on the 2nd floor of the academy is probably different from ours. Xing Jing asked confusedly. According to the laws of the Tang Empire and the rules of the palace, the Ministry of Rites has always been in charge of the affairs of the academy, especially the 2nd floor of the academy. Except for the people in the palace and the military ministry, no one else knows about it. Why did His Majesty ask you to tell me about it? Eunuch Lin smiled bitterly and said, "Isn't it all because of the young lady who just returned from your estate? I heard that the principal personally ordered her to take care of Mr. 13. Since Mr. 13 is going into secluded cultivation, your young lady will probably have to accompany him. Don't ask me when she'll be back. I really don't know." Hearing this, Mrs. Zheng panicked. Before the 2 senior brothers left the cliff cave, they said something to Ning Quebec. He knew that the headmaster and the academy wouldn't just leave him in the cave and let him fend for himself. Feeling a little relieved, he found a corner where the wind couldn't blow, spread his bedding and fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up and opened his eyes, he found that the sky was still dark. He walked to the entrance of the cave and looked out. There was no wind or rain. The distant Chang and city was shrouded in the morning light, which was very beautiful. Only then did he realize that the cliff faced the west. He could see more of the sunset from the cave, but it was much more difficult to get close to the morning light than the people under the sea of clouds. There were many things on the pole that 2nd brother carried, including many things from the old brush pen shop. No one knew if it was Chin Pippi or another senior brother or sister who went to Chang and city to fetch them. Before going to bed, Sang Sang checked everything. The big black umbrella, the primordial 13 arrows, the box of banknotes, and even the toothbrush and towel were all there. Sang Sang passed water, toothbrush, and towel into the cave. Ning Ke washed up hastily and ate breakfast. He immediately felt refreshed. Suddenly, he thought of a problem and couldn't help but frown. There's a toilet. Sang Sang knew what he was worried about from his expression. Ning Ke said helplessly, "It will stink." Sang Sang said, "Just wash it frequently." Ning Ke looked at the sea of clouds between the cliffs and shook his head. He sighed and said, "It's a pity that these clouds will be ruined. But youngest uncle also dirted it in the past, so it's not a big deal even if there are 2 more of us." After the refreshing feeling, Ning Ke pinched his nose and was ready to carry the toilet. Sang Sang looked at him and couldn't help laughing. She said, "Didn't you do these things by yourself when you were young? It's only been a few years, and you're already disgusted with the smell." Ning Ke said seriously, "Our identities are different now, so we naturally feel different. Speaking of which, there's something serious that I've always forgotten to discuss with you." Sang Sang asked, "What is it?" Ning Ke said, "I'm thinking if I should buy a maid." Sang Sang pointed at herself and asked confusedly, "Am I not a maid?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "Although you're still my little handmaiden, you're the daughter of a first-rank grand secretary. It's okay to make the bed and fold the quilt, but how can I let you continue to do the heavy work? I'm not used to being served by others." Sang Sang said, "Thinking that there will be one more person in the old brush pen shop, I feel a little awkward." Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "It's indeed a little awkward." Sang Sang smiled and shook her head. She walked into the cave with a basin of water for him to wash his hands. Then she walked to the corner to carry the toilet, walked back to the cliff, and poured it into the flowing clouds. After washing his hands, Ning Ke pulled down a dry towel hanging on the cave wall and wiped his hands. He looked at her and reminded her, "Put it far away. Although it's your own smell, it's still disgusting." Sang Sang agreed. Ning Ke suddenly froze while wiping his hands. He looked at her figure and felt a little dizzy. He suddenly came to his senses and shouted in shock, "How did you come in?" Sang Sang turned back in shock and found that she had walked into the cliff cave. And she had come in once when she carried the toilet. She couldn't help but let out a soft cry and quickly ran out. After a while, she held the cave wall and carefully looked inside. She asked, "Are you all right?" Ning Ke was a little confused and said, "I'm fine. The question is, are you all right?" Sang Sang looked down at herself and patted her chest to make sure that she was not hurt and did not vomit blood like Ning Quebec. She said, "I seem to be fine. Do you want to try again?" Ning Ke walked to the entrance of the cliff cave and stood in the line drawn yesterday. He stretched out his hand and pressed it in the air. He was a little disappointed to find that his palms still felt the stagnant touch. "I can't get out." He shook his head and understood what was going on. The inhibition at the entrance of the cliff cave was specially set by the headmaster to imprison youngest uncle. It was aimed at the great spirit in youngest uncle's body. The simple aura that the headmaster attached to the entrance of the cliff cave would suddenly activate once it sensed the existence of the great spirit. The stronger the great spirit was, the more powerful the inhibition would be. He and youngest uncle both had the great spirit in their bodies. If they wanted to get out of the cliff cave, they had to cultivate the great spirit to be strong enough to defeat the aura left by the headmaster and destroy the sea of chi of heaven and earth at the entrance of the cliff cave. Or they had to figure out how to integrate the great spirit in their bodies with the chi of heaven and earth in nature so that they could be in harmony. Only then could they not disturb the sea of chi at the entrance of the cliff cave. There was one last way, and that was to destroy the great spirit in their bodies. Ning Ke looked at the entrance of the cliff cave and felt a lot of emotions. The inhibition set by the headmaster was very simple. In essence, it was the aura that he left here. However, it set endless problems for the person who broke the inhibition. There were many difficult questions in the world. The difficulty lay in finding the only answer under countless complicated clues. The question left by the headmaster was very difficult, but it had a few answers. It was very difficult to choose. If one did not have the confidence to cultivate the Great Spirit to the extent of defeating the headmaster, would he be willing to destroy the powerful and precious Great Spirit in his body? Time would pass in the hesitation and struggle of the person who solved the question. As time went by, day by day, it would become more and more difficult to make a choice. It would even become a terrible torture. If one finally decided to give up after being imprisoned in the cliff cave for many years, he would look back on the first night he entered the cave. He would definitely regret why he did not destroy the Great Spirit in his body at that time. He had persisted for so many years. Wasn't it the most stupid thing to do? Would he be willing to give up in the face of such pain? It was obvious that youngest uncle did not choose the last method. Because when he left the academy and entered the human realm, he still had the Great Spirit. Moreover, a peerless figure like youngest uncle would definitely understand the true intention of the headmaster's question earlier than Ning Quebec. With his temperament and willpower, if he wanted to give up, he would definitely do so without any hesitation or wasting 3 years. Ning Ke did not think of the possibility that youngest uncle could directly break the inhibitions set by the headmaster with the Great Spirit. There was no reason to support his judgment. He just felt that this scene was not beautiful. Youngest uncle should have chosen the second method. 3 months. Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang, who still did not dare to walk back into the cliff cave, and repeated, 3 months. I'm not as strong as youngest uncle. I need 3 months to think about whether to use the last method or not. If I can't bear to destroy my Great Spirit, you know what to do. Sang Sang asked nervously, you want to use that method? I have never used it. Ning Ke said, I need your help. After a moment of silence, Sang Sang said, are you sure? Ning Ke said, I am sure. A cyan dress appeared between the cliffs. It was blown by the mountain wind and a petite figure could be vaguely seen. Today, the first person to visit Ning Ke was third sister, Yu Lian. Yu Lian walked to the cliff platform and sat down in front of the line at the entrance of the cave. She took out an old book from her sleeve and handed it to Ning Quebec. She looked at him and said softly, if you want to solve the problem, there is only one way. The cover of the old book was written with the words, Origin of the Aura of Heaven and Earth. Ning Ke took a look at the old book in his hand and asked seriously, which method? Yu Lian tucked her hair behind her ears and said, to learn. This is the second chapter. The third chapter will be very late. Try to finish it before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 381. Yu Lian was the first person Ning Ke knew from the back mountain of the academy. However, she was a female professor at that time, while he was just an ordinary student who went to the old library every day. In those memorable days, Ning Ke and she sat by the east and west windows respectively. One of them was writing regular script, while the other held a book and meditated. They seldom talked and occasionally nodded to each other. Later in the Sword Forest, they talked a few words. Later, before Ning Ke left the academy for the wilderness, she gave him something. Apart from that, there was no more communication. After all, they had a period of time in the old library, from the time when flowers bloomed to the time when cicadas sang. So they should be able to get along peacefully. However, Ning Ke really did not know how to face this third sister. Among the disciples of the back mountain of the academy, Yu Lian was a very special one. She was ranked only after eldest brother and second brother. However, her state of cultivation was ordinary. She was gentle and quiet, but did not like to communicate with others. It seemed that she was not interested in anything in the world and rarely appeared in front of people. When people saw her, it seemed that she was always writing hairpin-style small regular script. She was writing regular script in the old library, when there was a gathering, and when the headmaster of the academy opened the gate of the back mountain of the academy to imprison Ning Ke, she was still writing regular script in the drafty thatched cottage. When Ning Ke and Prince Long Qing climbed the mountain, everyone gathered at the peak and talked about it. At that moment, she stood alone in the flowers by the cliff, smiling and saying nothing. For Ning Ke, the biggest difficulty in getting along with third sister was that he did not know what attitude he should use to get along with her. He could not tell how old she was. She was quiet, elegant, and even a little cold. She wore a loose academy uniform and had a calm expression on her face, which gave her a very calm temperament. Her delicate and somewhat childish face and small body made people mistake her for a young girl when they saw her. "Senior sister, what book is this?" "This is a forbidden book." Hearing Yu Lian's gentle voice, Ning Ke raised his head in surprise. This book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth was written by a grand cultivator hundreds of years ago. It once caused a great stir in the cultivation world. Because it went against the teachings of Haotian, it was listed as a forbidden book by the West Hill Divine Palace and was forbidden to appear in the world. The last time this book appeared was in a large family in the Kingdom of Song. That family was exterminated because they secretly kept this book. Ning Ke's hand, which was holding the old book, slightly stiffened. He did not expect this book to have such an amazing origin. He could not understand it and asked, "Then why does the Academy have this book?" Yu Lian smiled and said, "Of course, the Academy can't lack books." Ning Ke thought of the huge cave next to the scholar's hut and shrugged his shoulders. "Senior sister, what if I can't understand this book?" Yu Lian said, "According to the headmaster's order, I'll come to the cliff cave every 10 days. Study this book well during these 10 days. Write down any questions you have and ask me later." Only then did Ning Ke realize that it was the headmaster's arrangement. Yu Lian did not say anything else. She only told him to study hard and went down the mountain. For the rest of the day, Ning Ke had been reading and studying except for eating. The more he read, the more he understood why the West Hill Divine Palace had listed this book as a banned book. Because the beginning of the book, Origin of Aura of Heaven and Earth, clearly stated the details in the final argument. Since the beginning of the world, all things were born, and the sun was born in the sky, giving all things a shape, state and essence. All things died and were renewed, and the essence in the body was scattered between heaven and earth. It was the aura of heaven and earth that cultivators could perceive today, which was the so-called chi of heaven and earth. Ning Ke did not study the origin of this world, but he felt that this argument was quite novel and interesting. Perhaps it was because this argument was too novel that it was strictly banned by the West Hill Divine Palace. Because this argument believed that the aura of heaven and earth came from all things themselves, and was not given by Haotian as mentioned in the doctrine of Haotian. If people really believed this argument, how could Haotian Taoism maintain the cultivator's reverence for Haotian? After entering the academy, Ning Ke had read many classics on cultivation in the old library. The first one he read was about the chi of heaven and earth. However, the origin of chi of heaven and earth in his hand was much more profound and obscure. Therefore, even though he was very interested, he still read very slowly. From sunrise to sunset, he had been sitting at the entrance of the cave, reading this forbidden book in silence. His mind was immersed in the wisdom of the predecessors, and he had a new understanding of the composition of this world, especially the production, quantity and operation of the aura of heaven and earth. He did not know how this book could help him solve the problem left by the headmaster of the academy, and how to complete his seclusion. But since the headmaster of the academy had asked him to read this book, he would continue reading it. Because he believed that the headmaster of the academy did not trap him in the cliff cave just to make him a professor of the academy. Ning Ke was reading in the cliff cave, and Sang Sang was watching him reading outside the cliff cave. After a long time, he was still interested. Every time he understood a profound explanation, his face would show a happy expression. Sang Sang, on the other hand, was bored. Fortunately, she had been used to boredom over the years, so she washed her hair. The night gradually shrouded Chang and city, the wilderness, the drifting clouds, and the cliff. After Sang Sang finished cooking, Ning Ke ate a few mouthfuls and began to read again. Sang Sang saw the flickering light of the torch. She thought for a while and walked into the hut. After searching for a long time, she found an oil lamp and passed it into the cave. Under the dim light of the oil lamp, Ning Ke held the book and continued to read it attentively. The experience of his previous life made him somewhat resistant to learning knowledge. However, it was also the experience of his previous life that told him that if he wanted to learn the knowledge in the book as soon as possible and be able to use it, he had to maintain absolute concentration. Ning Ke read until late at night, when the oil in the lamp was about to run out. He did not rush to sleep, but closed his eyes to review today's reading in his mind. Because he slept too late, Ning Ke was still very tired when he was awakened by the sound of bellows outside the cliff cave the next morning. He could not help but feel annoyed and wondered where the sound came from. He rubbed his eyes, put on a thin coat, and walked to the entrance of the cliff cave. He looked at the fat man who was supporting his waist and looking at the scenery outside the cliff, panting and pretending to be pretentious. His expression suddenly changed. The sound that woke him up was Chin Pippi's panting when he climbed the stone path. However, he did not expect that a person's panting could be as loud as thunder. "Do you have to be so tired?" he said helplessly. Hearing his voice, Chin Pippi did not turn around. He held his round waist and looked at the precipice in front of him, the drifting clouds between the cliffs, and Chang and city in the distance under the morning light. He panted and said in a hoarse voice like a scholar, "Oh, I once climbed to the top to see." "Stop." Ning Ke stopped his sigh by driving a donkey. Chin Pippi turned to look at him and shook his head repeatedly. He criticized, "That's not elegant. Although youngest uncle did ride a donkey back then, why do such an indecent thing in such a wonderful view?" Ning Ke looked at him and said angrily, "You know I'm not in a good mood. Don't pollute my ears with those sour words. Be careful, or I'll kick you down the mountain." Chin Pippi thought of the precipice that was so close to him when he went up the mountain, and his legs became weak again. He patted his chest with lingering fear and said, "This precipice is too steep. I almost lost my life when I climbed up. Thinking that you are going to stay here for 8 to 10 years, I really can't feel good." Ning Ke sneered and said, "That's because you're too fat." This sentence hit the nail on the head. Chin Pippi did not know how to fight back. He looked at the cliff cave and suddenly his eyes brightened. He exclaimed, "So this is where youngest uncle used to live. I didn't visit it because of the steep mountain road. Today is the first time I see it. This cliff cave is not ordinary. It's very historic. It's a great honor to live in it. I envy you." A stone whizzed through the air from the cave and almost hit Chin Pippi's foot. It bounced a few times on the cliff platform and fell into the sea of clouds on the cliff, never to be found again. Chin Pippi was shocked. He pointed at the cliff cave and shouted, "You're going to kill me." Ning Ke continued to search in the cave for a long time, but he couldn't find a second stone. He angrily rushed to the entrance of the cave and shouted, "You shameless thing! Why don't you live in such a historic cave? I'll give all the honor to you. Come in. Come in." Chin Pippi sneered and said, "Come out if you can." Ning Ke said shamelessly, "Come in if you can." Sang Sang had been standing beside the cliff cave and watching the senior brother and junior brother quarreling. She finally couldn't help saying, "I think you're both very capable." Ning Ke and Chin Pippi looked at her at the same time. Chin Pippi hesitated for a moment and asked seriously, "Are you telling the truth or sarcasm?" Sang Sang looked at him and said nothing. Chin Pippi had always thought that he was a peerless genius. However, he had been to the old brush pen shop several times and played chess with Sang Sang. At least in front of Sang Sang, he didn't have such confidence anymore. Correspondingly, he valued Sang Sang's evaluation or praise of him very much. Sang Sang's silence hurt his self-esteem to a certain extent. He looked at Ning Ke in the cliff cave and said mockingly, "Only a monkey locked in an iron cage would throw stones at people because it's too boring." "I forgive you." Ning Ke said, "Whatever you say. Hit me if you can." Chinpipi took something out of his arms and threw it directly into the cave. It happened so suddenly that Ning Ke was almost hit in the face. Fortunately, his body reacted quickly. He turned sideways and reached out his right hand to catch the thing. It was a wrinkled book. There was no name on the cover, but there were many sweat stains. Ning Ke thought that the sweat stains might be from the fat man and felt a little disgusted. What book is this? He resisted the nausea and looked at Chinpipi outside the cave. Chinpipi said, "No name." Then what does this book talk about? The no-boundary spirit of the academy. Ning Ke didn't understand and asked, "What's that?" Chinpipi thought that he was teasing him again and said angrily, "This book talks about the no-boundary spirit of the academy. If you don't understand it, I'll tell the teacher. I'm tired, but there's still the 4th chapter. But it might not be finished until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Let's read it tomorrow." Good, good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 382. The No-Boundary Spirit of the Academy. Ning Ke looked at the wrinkled book in his hand and naturally thought of the opening day of the 2nd floor of the academy last spring. He turned around and saw the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," on the stone when he climbed down the mountain with difficulty. He could not help frowning and thinking for a long time. A few days ago, he learned from second brother that Prince Long Qing saw the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," which was actually a comment made by the headmaster of the academy. So the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," were undoubtedly left by the headmaster of the academy for him, or a warning to his life. What did the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," on the stone mean? What is the connection between this old book and the word "not a tool"? Did the headmaster of the academy foresee that he needed to learn the no-boundary spirit of the academy in advance? Ning Ke looked out of the cave and asked, "If there is a problem in the book, how can I solve it?" Chinpipi said, "I will go up the mountain every 10 days. If there is anything you don't understand," Ning Ke just realized that this was the curriculum arrangement of the headmaster of the academy for him, just like third sister Yulian. He shook his head and said, "You are not third sister, so don't be too optimistic. You have to come up the mountain every day, or sang, and I will be bored to death." Chinpipi said sarcastically, "You want me to come up the mountain with you? Are you begging me? You were so fierce to me before. What can you do to me if I go down the mountain now?" Ning Ke replied, "Then get out of the mountain quickly." Chinpipi was really obedient. He turned around and was ready to go down the cliff platform. Suddenly, he stopped and turned to look at Ning Ke in the cave. He was silent for a long time. Ning Ke looked at him with a slightly strange expression. Chinpipi suddenly said, "I heard that the headmaster prepared 3 books for you to read. If you can't come out after reading all 3 books, then you may not come out in this life." Ning Ke slightly frowned and asked, "What's the 3rd book?" Chinpipi shook his head and said, "No one knows." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke suddenly laughed and said, "If one day it is confirmed that I can't get out, I will have to trouble you to find me a spoon." Chinpipi was slightly surprised and asked, "What do you need a spoon for?" Ning Ke pointed to the depths of the dark cliff cave behind him and said, "Give me a spoon, and I can dig a long tunnel directly through the academy's cliff, mirror lake and mist, and return to the human world." Chinpipi felt that there was something wrong with his brain and said sympathetically, "Don't put too much pressure on yourself." Ning Ke knew that he didn't understand what kind of spirit and attitude he was trying to express, but it was enough for him to understand. He lowered his head and began to read the book. Chinpipi heaved a sigh and left the cliff plateau slowly and smoothly. The metaphysical was known as the Tao, and the metaphysical was known as the tool. Artifact, artifact. The great Tao was not a weapon, it was the Tao of heaven, it did not care about its specific form. A gentleman is not a tool, which means that people should not rigidly adhere to some fixed rules. The two words "not a tool" meant that they held a condescending, arrogant, and undisciplined attitude towards the rules. Note, there are some differences in the original meaning of the word. I chose this one because of the need of the story. Ning Ke opened the old book with no words on the cover, and was soon attracted by the contents of the book, and his eyes could no longer leave the paper. For the rest of the day and night, apart from eating and sleeping, he read and thought. When he got tired of reading one book, or when his mind got stuck in some kind of stagnation, he would switch to another book, and when he could no longer progress in reading this book, he would switch back to the original one. Time passed slowly in this cycle and adjustment. Sang Sang cooked and cleaned, chatted with him when he was tired, and when she had the courage to walk into the cliff cave again, she quietly sat beside him, holding a needle and thread to embroider the soles of shoes. No matter how the two books helped Ning Ke solve his problems and get rid of his life as a prisoner, the knowledge and wisdom of the predecessors in the book were enough to make him feel that he had gained a lot. The book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth made him come across this new world idea for the first time, and then in the following sections, he understood more new sayings. The so-called aura of heaven and earth was a kind of invisible particle that naturally existed in the wilderness and rivers, which was also called the chi of heaven and earth by cultivators. According to the book, all the chi of heaven and earth in the world originated from the sun in the sky, and only a small part came from the depths of the earth. These original auras began to show different characteristics as they soaked and washed over time, because of the different things attached to them, and because of the infection of the environment. For example, the chi of heaven and earth contained in the trees was completely different from the chi of heaven and earth in the stones. However, this difference was extremely subtle in the perception of ordinary cultivators, and it was difficult to be discovered. Ning Ke thought of the feeling when he first saw the stone array tactics of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine by the Daming Lake, and found that the saying in the book was somewhat different from what his master Yen Sei had said, but it did make some sense. After thinking for a moment, he took out several pieces of fu paper and cast them one by one. Looking at the fire and water mist in front of him, he used his psyche power to carefully perceive the difference between them, and then carefully recorded what he learned on the paper. In the afternoon, after eating, he put the bowl beside him casually, and began to cast fu again to experience the subtle difference between the chi of heaven and earth. When he was free in the old brush pen shop, he would write fu for leisure. Although the power of fu was still weak, he had saved a lot of fu paper, which was more than enough for experiments. This time he cast a water fu. The yellowish fu paper disappeared in the air, and the chi of heaven and earth in the cliff cave slowly converged and condensed into a handful of water, and then fell to the ground, falling right into the bowl. The water rippled in the bowl for a few times, and then became calm. Ning Ke looked at the gradually muddy water in the bowl, and thoughtfully opened the book that described the no-boundary spirit of the academy beside him, and began to compare it with some contents in the book. Then, he cast a water talisman and let the water fall on the ground. He stared at the water that gradually disappeared along the cracks of the stone, like countless transparent earthworms. The bowl was an utensil, the cracks of the stones were utensils, and even the vault of heaven and field was just a large utensil. When the water fell into the bowl, it was a semicircle. When it fell into the cracks of the stones, it was a transparent earthworm. When it was released by the clouds, it was a bead curtain. When it flowed into the field, it was countless tiny particles. The water itself had no shape, and it only had shape because of the utensil that carried it. This was the real no-boundary spirit. Was the chi of heaven and earth like this kind of existence? It was easy to draw such an inference. Looking at the book, Ning Ke did not feel proud at all, and tried to find the connection between this inference and the inhibition of the cliff cave. After a long time, he woke up from his meditation, and rubbed his eyebrows tiredly. Then he noticed that Sang Sang had come to him, and was embroidering there. "I remember before I went to the wilderness, you said that your embroidery was so bad that you didn't want people in Chang'an to see it, so you gave your needles and thread to Xiao Chao. Where did this come from?" Ning Ke asked. Sang Sang raised her head and scratched her temple with the end of the needle. She said, "I asked seventh sister for this yesterday when I went down the mountain." I have to find something to do to kill time. Ning Ke thought that she was really bored staying on the cliff plateau. Then he suddenly thought of something, and handed over the Book of No Boundary Spirit in his hand. He said, "You can read it when you are bored." Sang Sang was slightly startled and said, "Can I read it too?" These two books were the Academy's treasured supreme arts. They must have been carefully selected by the headmaster for his little disciple, and the common people could not read them. Logically speaking, Ning Ke should not let Sang Sang read them, but he had long been used to sharing all the good things with Sang Sang, and even ranked her ahead of himself. The most important thing was that he had been poor and afraid since childhood, so he was stingy. Now he no longer worried about money, but he still subconsciously wanted to take advantage of others. Ning Ke said, "This is a good thing. You will suffer a loss if you don't read it." Sang Sang felt it was indeed a pity and said, "But I can't understand it." Ning Ke said, "Even the great divine priest of light, that shameless swindler, wants to accept you as his successor. You must be very talented in cultivation, maybe even better than me and Chin Pippi. You have been following me all these years, but I have not thought of exploring this side of you. Maybe a cultivation genius has been buried." Sang Sang laughed and said, "You are making fun of me again." Ning Ke said, "Never mind that. We will take advantage of you if you read it." Sang Sang thought it made sense. She took the book and began to read it carefully. Ning Ke continued to read the book. The more he read, the more he felt that it was reasonable for the West Hill Divine Palace to seal this book. Because this book actually included the chi of heaven and earth absorbed by the Devil's Doctrine's cultivation method into the body, and it was the same as Haotian's divine light. Suddenly, his eyes suddenly brightened. Because he saw a whole set of cultivation methods for cultivating chi at the back of the book. At the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, Ning Ke had inherited the youngest uncle's mantle. He had used the residual sword style and the modeled sword mark left by youngest uncle to directly create a path in Ning Ke's snow mountain and ocean of chi. Then the Great Spirit poured into his body and drove the cyclone in his lower abdomen to start absorbing the chi of heaven and earth around. For Ning Ke now, once he used his psyche power to drive the cyclone to start absorbing the chi of heaven and earth, he could no longer control the process. He did not know how to make the process more efficient. If the cultivation method left in this book was real, wouldn't it mean that he could cultivate the Great Spirit much faster? Could he improve his state in the shortest time possible? Ning Ke's hands holding the book trembled slightly. The depression of being imprisoned in the cliff cave was replaced by the surprise and gratitude to the headmaster of the academy and third sister. The academy's cultivation classics should be shared, and such a great harvest and happiness should be shared. He turned around immediately and wanted to tell Sang Sang about it. However, he saw that Sang Sang had already fallen asleep. Looking at Sang Sang, who was holding the book and sleeping soundly without leaning against the wall of the cliff cave, Ning Ke could not help but laugh. He thought that this little girl was indeed not made for cultivation, or at least not for reading. After a while, Ning Ke calmed down and quietly read the cultivation method in the book from beginning to end. He only closed his eyes slowly when he was sure that he could remember every word in the book. He began to cultivate chi for the first time. What he cultivated was the Great Spirit. The 4th chapter is finally written. I'm also useless. These chapters are too damn hard to write. There will definitely be an update after I wake up. But today's update will be very late. I'm going to sleep. I'll ask for a recommendation vote to stimulate me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 383. To raise was to support, to nurture, to pity, to protect, and to mend. To raise chi was to carry out these actions on the chi of heaven and earth that was absorbed into the body. Ning Ke followed the description in the book and entered a state that was similar to meditation. However, it was not as deep as meditation, and he still maintained a continuous connection with the real world. This connection was breathing, or in other words, breathing. The air in the cliff cave entered his lungs according to the rhythm of breathing, and then returned to the outside through his mouth and nose. The chi of heaven and earth contained in the air gradually settled and stopped in the process, and began to nourish every part of his body, including the most subtle parts. Every time he breathed, Ning-Ke could feel a trace of chi of heaven and earth entering his body. This change was very subtle, but when he entered a certain rhythm, the superposition of this subtle change would become more obvious, even to the extent that he could feel the increase of the aura. After inheriting the youngest uncle's mantle at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the process of absorbing the chi of heaven and earth and transforming it into the Great Spirit had always been slow. Moreover, at this time, he finally found that he could actively cultivate the Great Spirit, and from then on, it became something that he could control and look forward to. After the initial shock, he began to feel happy. This was a surprise. The night was deep, and the morning light was about to rise. In the cliff cave, Sang Sang was dozing off while Ning-Ke sat cross-legged and seriously breathed every breath of air. He felt the chi of heaven and earth flowing into his body, like a drunkard drinking cans of hard liquor. He was so happy and intoxicated that he did not know where he was and where he would go. The air flow in the cliff cave brought in the slightly cold mountain wind under the warm morning light. It blew on Sang Sang's body and woke her up from her sleep. She rubbed her eyes. She looked at Ning-Ke beside her with a confused look on her face. With the influx of the chi of heaven and earth, the Great Spirit in Ning-Ke's body was increasing at a slow but unstoppable speed. His body was also changing because of this. This change was deeply hidden under his skin, between his muscles, and in his blood. Except for himself, no one could see any trace of it with the naked eye. But Sang Sang still felt that Ning-Ke was undergoing some kind of change. Because she could feel that in the space around her, there seemed to be a very faint existence, even fainter than the wind, slowly approaching Ning-Ke's body. The morning mist between the cliffs also seemed to feel some kind of call and floated into the cave, gently covering Ning-Ke's body. After a long time, Ning-Ke woke up. He silently looked at the azure sky outside the cliff cave, deep in thought. The chi of heaven and earth was everywhere between the cliffs and the clouds. There was also the chi of heaven and earth in the quiet trees and the swimming fish. Therefore, when it entered the human body, it was still the chi of heaven and earth. Thinking in this way, what was the essential difference between the Haotian divine flame of Haotian Taoism and the genuine chi in the body of the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine? The book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth talked about this truth and tried to solve the doubts of cultivators in theory, trying to establish a unified system. This new system would fundamentally overthrow the doctrine of Haotian Taoism. No wonder it was banned by the West Hill Divine Palace. The other book told Ning-Ke that he did not need to care about the form of the chi of heaven and earth. Just like water in nature, whether it was between cliffs, in the clouds, in the mountain stream, in the calm lake, or in the rushing river, the essence would not change. It was still water. The ideas of the two books were similar to a certain extent. However, the book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth finally gave up the discussion of metaphysics and went directly to the road of cultivating a certain characteristic of the chi of heaven and earth to the extreme. Because the extreme would eventually return to the origin of things. The headmaster of the academy imprisoned Ning-Ke in the cliff cave, which was equivalent to asking a difficult question and putting 3 answers in front of him in advance. The ideas in the two books were the two methods that the headmaster of the academy taught him. Either to cultivate the Great Spirit to the extreme and powerful state and ignore the heaven and earth, or to use the no-boundary spirit to harmonize the Great Spirit inside the body with the chi of heaven and earth outside the body. Chen Pipi said there were 3 books, and these were 2 of them. Then what was the 3rd book? What other methods could he find by reading that book? In the following days, Ning-Ke seemed to return to the time when he first entered the academy and went to the old library. His life was calm and simple. He ate, slept, read, thought, and then read again. He had no distractions and was fully focused on reading. He put all the boring time and life in the cliff cave into reading. With the help of the 2 books, Ning Ke had a deeper understanding of the Great Spirit. The Great Spirit in his body became purer and more vigorous. At the same time, he had a better understanding of the operating rules and the existence of the Qi of heaven and earth. He even made significant progress in talisman Taoism. He vaguely sensed the key to solve the problem of the headmaster of academy and to break the inhibition to leave the cliff cave. But he still could not grasp the thread. He could not figure out how to mix the 2 completely different auras with light and dust, or even turn their actual existence into nothingness. 10 days passed quickly. 3rd sister Yu Lian came. Her loose academy uniform fluttered in the cliff wall like a flag. She walked into the cliff cave and instantly became as quiet as the silk cloth on the table. Ning Ke did not waste any time. After a simple salute, he took out the paper with the questions he had these days and seriously asked her about the problems he had encountered in reading. Yu Lian began to answer after thinking for a while. Her words were concise and even too simple. It seemed that she was a man of few words. However, these simple answers often fell on the most critical parts and directly made Ning Ke's stagnant thoughts suddenly clear, and he easily saw a new path in the fog. Finally, Ning Ke began to ask about the qi cultivation method at the back of the book after hesitating for a while. Yu Lian frowned slightly and remained silent. Ning Ke glanced at Sang Sang, who was sitting outside the cliff cave and embroidering. He thought that senior sister was silent because there were outsiders from the academy present and it was inconvenient. Yu Lian smiled and said, "Since the headmaster asked this little girl to accompany you, you don't mind her listening beside you. The so-called qi cultivation method seems to be from the devil's doctrine, but this cliff cave is far away from the world. Why do you care?" The next day, Chen Pippi climbed up the cliff platform panting. Ning Ke naturally laughed at him and expressed his great displeasure that Chen Pippi did not come up to the cliff to visit him these days. Chen Pippi explained that the stone path was too slanted and the cliff was too steep, but Ning Ke did not understand. He sighed helplessly and ignored this guy's annoyance. Then he began to practice the no-boundary spirit of the academy. The so-called no-boundary spirit means that there is no trace of it. Just like the snow mud, it is in the east and suddenly in the west. There is no way to know where the snow trembles. When you want to move, you move at will. If you don't, how can the enemy know what you want to do? Chen Pippi raised his right arm and pointed at the blue sky above the cliff with his ring finger. An invisible aura suddenly shot out from between his fingers, but it did not shoot into the sky in the direction of his fingers. Instead, it shot into the cliff cave unpredictably. That invisible aura was the qi of heaven and earth that was compressed to the extreme. The aura brushed past Ning Ke's shoulder and quietly fell on the hard rock wall of the cliff cave. With a soft sound, a dark round hole appeared on the wall. No one knew how deep the hole was. I was already very tired. Friends came from afar and I drank a few cups of wine. I suddenly collapsed and suffered for a long time, but I could only write this much. You all know that I have been working hard these days and I have a good attitude. I will continue to work hard tomorrow. Although I wrote less today, I really need the recommendation votes. After all, it's Monday. Please support me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 384. Ning Ke did not react at all. It was not until the invisible qi of the finger brushed past his shoulder and shot a deep black hole on the cave wall that he came to his senses and felt a chill in his heart. He did not know that Chen Pippi's finger was the natural stream magical finger of Jishou Abbey. What shocked him was not the power of the finger, but the unpredictable changes when Chen Pippi pointed it. The finger was pointing at the clear sky, but why did it fall behind him? Was this the no-boundary spirit of the academy? Cultivators cultivate heaven and earth and themselves. We need to use the psyche power in our bodies to control the chi of heaven and earth. Our bodies are the firewood, psyche power is the fire, heaven and earth are the stove, primordial chi is the ingredients such as vegetables, meat and fish, and fighting skills are the way to match the ingredients. Apart from the above factors, the most important thing to make a delicious dish is the heat control when cooking. If you ask a chef how to control the heat, an ordinary chef will probably tell you when to use what kind of fire and how long to cook the food. However, a truly brilliant chef will not be so rigid. He will know what the food in the pot is just by using his palm to scoop quickly in the steam room. This is an experience that he has gained after countless trials. This kind of experience is difficult to explain in words. Sometimes, it can even make people feel that it is too mysterious. You can only feel and experience it on your own. Chen Pippi looked at Ning Ke in the cliff cave and said, "The heat control is the meaning." Ning Ke thought for a moment and understood what he wanted to say. He suddenly had a more intuitive understanding of the book that taught about the no-boundary spirit of the academy. Thinking of the example that Chen Pippi gave in the letter when he first entered the old library of the academy, he could not help but sigh and say, "Eating and sex are indeed human nature." You took these two things as examples and it is really easy to understand. Third sister and Chen Pippi were ordered by the headmaster of the academy to climb the cliff to teach, mainly to solve some problems that Ning Ke encountered in reading. The real understanding still depended on him. After Chen Pippi's explanation, Ning Ke decided to find time to digest it at night. There was no need to discuss too much at this time. He had been imprisoned in the cliff cave for 10 days and did not know what had happened in the world outside the academy. He asked, "Is Chang'an still peaceful recently?" Chen Pippi said, "When was Chang'an not peaceful? What are you concerned about?" Ning Ke said, "Someone in the imperial court seems to have a problem with me. I know that before I returned to the capital, someone even wanted to bring Sang Sang to the military ministry for interrogation. You were there." Chen Pippi nodded and said, "It's very simple. You don't need to worry about it." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "What about the two sadhus we met on the street a few days ago? Even if Dao Shi came from the Xiankong temple, he wouldn't have the ability to easily find me in Chang'an, where there are so many people. That encounter seems to have been set up." Chen Pippi frowned slightly and asked, "What are you suspecting?" "In Chang'an, only the Imperial Center administration and the military could locate me so easily." Ning Ke said, "I don't know which of them informed the Xiankong temple." Hearing this, Chen Pippi frowned even more and said, "Helping outsiders to challenge the academy's disciples who have entered the human realm? Even the military wouldn't have the guts to do that. Besides, aren't they worried that they would be scolded by the people of Chang'an after the matter is exposed?" Ning Ke had lived in the Tang army for many years. Of course, he knew the style of the military very well. He said, "As long as it's good for the empire, the generals won't care about anything." Chen Pippi stayed on the cliff platform and ate the white meat and pickled cabbage hot pot cooked by Sang Sang. He wiped his oily lips and shamelessly ignored the mess and the piles of dirty bowls. He hummed a little tune and walked down the cliff happily. No matter how Ning Ke cursed him, he didn't fall into the abyss. Facing the cliff and the cloud, Ning Ke scolded Chen Pippi loudly. Unfortunately, the cliff was beside him and the cloud in front of him was the void. He couldn't hear any echo at all, so he inevitably felt a little lonely. Without wasting any time, he walked back to the depth of the cliff cave and sat on the old futon. He sat cross-legged and meditated with his eyes closed. He continued to cultivate the Great Spirit in his body according to the cultivation method in the book. The white clouds between the cliffs seemed to be indifferent. But Sang Sang, who was squatting on the edge of the cliff and washing the bowls, clearly felt the change in the cave. She looked back, but there was no morning fog at this time, so she couldn't see the scene before. When the night shrouded the cliff, Ning Ke slowly opened his eyes and ended today's cultivation. Looking at Sang Sang who was standing in front of him with a plate of food, he shook his head and said, "I'm not hungry yet. Put it aside. If you're tired, go to rest early." If you're bored, talk with me for a while. Sang Sang knew that he had been worried that she would be bored and lonely. She also knew that with his temperament, he definitely wouldn't have any interest in chatting before he solved the problem. So she smiled and shook her head. She put the food beside him and walked back to the hut on the edge of the cliff. Ning Ke was still sitting cross-legged with his hands spread out on his knees. A yellowish fu paper appeared in his left palm. The fu paper was slowly disintegrating at a speed visible to the naked eye, releasing talisman intent into the air. His right palm was empty, but the light of the oil lamp was slightly deformed. The aura between the two palms were faintly different. The chi of heaven and earth condensed by the fu paper was above the left hand, while the pure Great Spirit overflowed from the right. He looked at the two invisible auras in front of him attentively. His deep psyche power slowly and carefully touched every fragment of the aura, trying to find something from it. The chi of heaven and earth condensed in his left hand and the Great Spirit in his right hand were both invisible and intangible like the void. But with his psyche power, he could clearly distinguish the difference. Since he was imprisoned in the cliff cave, Ning Ke had read the two books and practiced hard. Now he could clearly distinguish the aura of heaven and earth that seemed to be exactly the same but actually had slight differences. But he still couldn't unify the aura of heaven and earth that had different forms into the same state, even if it was as similar as possible. He couldn't even sort out his thoughts in this aspect. According to the concept in the book, Examination of the Origin, the genuine chi in the body of the cultivators of the Devil's Doctrine and the Great Spirit in his body were actually a kind of chi of heaven and earth. If he could go back to the original state countless years ago and change the appearance of the Great Spirit into the original state, then he would be able to solve the inhibition in the cliff cave and have a perfect answer to the question given by the headmaster. But it was a pity that he was still at a level where he didn't know why. Not to mention that he couldn't deduce the specific operation method from what he knew. When he was challenged by Monk Guanhai, he thought for half a day by the winter lake at the foot of Yanming Mountain and came up with a way to use the Great Spirit with talisman intent. And it was very effective. He could use the chaos of the primordial chi caused by the talisman intent to effectively cover the aura of the Great Spirit. But if he met a real grand cultivator, he would be seen through at a glance. As a core disciple of the headmaster of academy and a student of the second floor of the academy, even if he was seen through to join the devil, he probably wouldn't be killed immediately. But what if he was seen by others? On the futon in the depths of the cliff cave, Ning Ke looked at the two auras between his hands and thought for a long time. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was a little confused and frightened inside. Sang Sang walked back to the cave from the hut by the cliff and found a dry and quiet place. She opened the bedding and fell asleep. Ning Ke walked to her and quietly looked at her dark little face for a long time. Then he reached out to tuck the corner of the quilt and turned to go deeper into the cliff cave. These days, he had been thinking about solving the problem and didn't pay much attention to the cliff cave as a bedroom. At this time, his thoughts were a little chaotic, so he simply put these annoying things aside and walked slowly. The cliff cave wasn't big. There was an opening about 2 people's height on the side of the precipice. Inside, there was a space about 10 steps wide. The cave walls weren't smooth, nor were there any jagged rocks. Nothing special could be seen. Going deeper, there was a long, slanted cave on the left and right sides. These 2 caves were a little narrow. After walking for more than 10 steps, they came to the end. The deepest part was all hard and solid granite, and there was no possibility of going further. Ning Ke held the oil lamp and looked at the cave wall. There were countless fine-cut lines on the stone wall. They might be formed naturally, but they looked more like they were cut by sharp metal objects. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. In the depths of the Tianqi Mountains in the northernmost part of the wilderness, in the abandoned front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he had once seen the mottled sword marks left by youngest uncle on the bluestone wall. It was also because of those sword marks that he understood the true meaning of the Great Spirit and inherited youngest uncle's mantle that he was able to defeat the terrifying Master Lotus. He remembered that youngest uncle had been imprisoned by his teacher for 3 years. No one came to visit him, let alone Sang Sang. He must have been very depressed. Could it be that these 2 narrow holes were cut by him with a sword? If these 2 narrow holes were also left by youngest uncle, then would these marks that looked like they were made by knives and axes, like the mottled sword marks in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine? Would they contain some aura and some hidden meaning? Ning Ke held the oil lamp and stood in the middle of the wall full of cut lines. He gradually became excited. He went to get a wooden stick and held the oil lamp in front of the narrow cave entrance. With the dim light, he began to carefully examine the cut marks on the stone wall that looked like the ripples in the lake. No matter if his idea was correct or not, he should at least try. He looked for a long time, but did not see any aura hidden in these cut lines. He did not find any pattern in these lines, but he still did not give up. After a moment of silence, he stretched out his hands and placed them on the wall. He slowly touched the stone wall, feeling the roughness coming from the surface of his palms. He touched from the entrance to the bottom of the cave, from his feet to the top of his head. He did not let go of any cut line and did not miss any area. He did this for the whole night. The night outside the cliff cave was gradually replaced by the light blue sky. His face was full of exhaustion, but there was no sign of discouragement. Try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.